are excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast, presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. This is a special 2-part release for Easter given to the Sisters of Liberty. Where are we in the Book of Mormon timeline? Easter. I am he who liveth, I am he who is slain.
A lot of stuff to cover. Holy cow. So the things that we're going to be talking about, kind of outside of my normal wheelhouse as far as that's concerned. I mean, usually I do, science stuff and Book of Mormon stuff and those kind of things. I've loved looking at the signs of the times and what's going to happen before Christ comes and so forth. That's been something I've always had a deep interest in. Back in 1990, I actually was asked. I was teaching Elders Quorum down in Phoenix, Arizona. They had one lesson on signs of the second coming. And after we did the lesson, I had so much more material, and I said, well, could you do it another week? And it ended up going into 8 weeks. We had half the sisters in the Word coming into the Elders Quorum because it's just everybody's fascinated by this subject. I mean, it really is something that's really pretty amazing. So I'd like to start off with a little video here.
It is a record of ancient America. It is a scripture of the New World, as certainly as the Bible is the scripture of the Old. Each speaks of the other. Each carries with it the spirit of inspiration, the power to convince and to convert. Together they become two witnesses, hand in hand, that Jesus is the Christ, the resurrected and living Son of the living God. Its narrative is a chronicle of nations long since gone, but in its descriptions of today's society, it is as current as the daily newspaper and much more definitive, inspired, and inspiring concerning the solutions of those problems.
Now the scriptures tell us about the war in heaven over free agency, similar to the war we're going through now, where the devil's program was guaranteed security as opposed to the Lord's program of letting each choose for himself, even if he makes the wrong choice. Once you understand these scriptures, you'll understand why the presidents of the church have opposed communism, socialism, and the welfare state. And you see why you must oppose them too, if you're in harmony with the word of the Lord. The scriptures also tell about our inspired Constitution. If you accept these scriptures, you'll automatically reject the counsel of others who depreciate our Constitution. If you use the scriptures as a guide, you know what the Book of Mormon has to say regarding murderous conspiracies in the last day, and how we're to awake to the awful situation today. I find certain elements in the church do not like to see the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants so much. It has too much to say about freedom.
I know of no other writing which sets forth with such clarity the tragic consequences to societies who follow courses contrary to the commandments of God. Its pages trace the stories of two distinct civilizations that flourished on this Western Hemisphere. They began small, their people walking in the fear of the Lord. But with prosperity came growing evils. The people succumbed to the wiles of ambitious and scheming leaders who oppressed them with burdensome taxes, who lulled them with hollow promises, who countenanced and even encouraged loose and lascivious living, who led them into terrible wars that resulted in the death of millions and the final and total extinction of two great civilizations in two eras.
Now the question arises, what can we do to preserve our Constitution? And how can we avoid being misled into doing those things that will actually help to destroy it? During last October conference, I spoke on the subject, Be Not Deceived. I said there were 3 keys one could use to avoid deception. First, the Scriptures. Second, the words of the prophets, especially the prophet, the president of the church, and particularly the living one. And third, the Holy Ghost.
Now, we have not been using the Book of Mormon as we should. Our homes are not as strong unless we are using it to bring our children to Christ. Our families may be corrupted by the worldly trends and teachings unless we know how to use the book to expose and combat the falsehoods in socialism. Our church classes are not as spirit-filled unless we hold it up as a standard. And our nation will continue to degenerate unless we read and heed the words of the God of this land, Jesus Christ, and quit building up and upholding the secret combinations which the Book of Mormon tells us proved the downfall of both previous American civilizations.
General Moroni, one of the great men of the Book of Mormon, raised the title of liberty, and on it he inscribed these words: "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children." Why didn't he write upon it, "Just live your religion"? There is no need to concern yourselves about your freedom, your peace, your wives, or your children. The reason he didn't was because all these things were a part of his religion as they are of ours. Listen to what the Book of Mormon had to say of the man who raised the title of liberty. "And Moroni was a strong and mighty man. He was a man of perfect understanding, yea, a man that did not delight in bloodshed, a man whose soul did joy in the liberty and the freedom of his country, and his brethren from bondage and slavery. Yea, and he was a man who was firm in the faith of Christ, and he had sworn with an oath to defend his people, his rights, and his country, and his religion, even to the loss of his blood." Unquote. And then Moroni is paid this high tribute. "Yea, verily, verily, I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men." Unquote. Now, part of the reason why we do not have sufficient priesthood bearers to save the Constitution, let alone to shake the powers of hell, is, I fear, because unlike Moroni, our souls do not joy in keeping our country free, and we are not firm in the faith of Christ, nor have we sworn with an oath to defend our rights.
No other written testament so clearly illustrates the fact that when men and nations walk in the fear of God and in obedience to His commandments, they prosper and grow. But when they disregard Him and His word, there comes a decay that, unless otherwise arrested by righteousness, leads to impotence and death. The Book of Mormon is an affirmation of the Old Testament proverb, "Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people."
The Book of Mormon has declared over and over again, the blessings of heaven are contingent upon the righteousness of its people. In fact, this teaching has been attested to in almost every age. Remember in 1831 when the famous French historian said, "I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless prairies, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world of commerce, and it was not there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand her genius and power. America is great because she is good. If America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great.
So I want to start off first off with Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, and this is a talk that he gave about 2.5, 3 years ago, called the Greatness of the Evidence. He said it should be noted that truly rock-ribbed faith and uncompromised conviction comes with its most complete power when it engages our head as well as our heart. And so, so a lot of times we get emotionally involved with this, but also we need to take a look at, so what does the Scriptures say, and what can we know, logically as well. Making our case for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, he says, I believe that God intends us to find and use the evidence he has given. Reasons, if you will, which affirm the truthfulness of his work. So if there's evidence, if God is going to give us evidence to show us when the times are happening, then I think we should use that evidence, Like those converted Lamanites, we may with bold conviction hold up to a world that desperately needs it the greatness of the evidences which we've received, especially of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, the keystone of our religion. So to start off, now, if you've been following our work for some time, you already know about the information about how the promised lands are. So I'm going to really blast through that part so we can get down to kind of the meat of the subject for today, which basically you start off with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? And there was a promised land. Where was the first recorded land of promise? You should all know this maybe by now. Does anybody know where that's located? What scriptures? So where is the first recorded land of promise in the Scriptures? It's actually not in the Old Testament. It's actually in the Pearl of Great Price in Moses. And in chapter 6, verse 17, says that Enos, who was a grandson of Adam, he lived 90 years to beget Canaan, and Enos and the residue of the people of God came out of the land called Shulon and dwelt in this land of promise, which he called after his own son, whose name was Canaan. So the original land of promise was named after Canaan, which is Adam's great-grandson, right? So where was this promised land? Well, where was the Garden of Eden located? Missouri, basically, right? So when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, did they stay there, or did they travel thousands of miles away to other continents? Well, for the answer to that, we actually have to go to Scripture, and this is in section 107, the Doctrine of Covenants. It says that 3 years before he died, Adam called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah into the valley of Adam-on-the-Ammon. So how old was Adam when he died? Like 930 years old. So this is 927 years after they've been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Okay, they're still there in this place called Adam-on-the-Ammon. And just in case you're looking for a sign, there's your sign. Okay, so there's, boom. So if you want to know where the Garden of Eden is located, where the Adam-on-the-Ammon is located, then this is the church's official sign there. And this is the valley of Adam-on-the-Ammon. And this is the scripture that backs it up. Basically says Spring Hill is named by the Lord, Adam-on-the-Ammon, and it's in Spring Hill in Davies County, Missouri. So do we know this by speculation or by revelation? It's a revelation from the Lord, right? So we know where this is located. This is not in question. And now we know that Adam basically remained there in that area for basically at least 927 years. Because that was where he had all of his sons come back to receive this special blessing. So this is Spring Hill, Adam-on-the-Ammon, again by the church. So this is Canaan, and this is the first land of promise, right? So what was the promise? The promise is basically this. If you be righteous, then you get to stay on this promised land. If you become wicked, then I can't allow you to remain on this special land. So we get down to the time of Noah, and what's happening to the people? They're in a state of apostasy. They've forgotten about this promise, this covenant. And so God calls a prophet by the name of Noah, and he builds an ark. And he basically takes the ark from here in America. So the ark would have been built where? Yeah, basically in America here somewhere, okay? Although I do know about the ideas of being in San Pete as well. But bottom line is it ended up where? the mountains of Ararat in Turkey, on the other side of the earth, basically, right? There have been those even within the church. In fact, LDS Living had an article that was written by one of our scholars, basically, and he said that Noah's flood probably wasn't even a real event. It was probably just a hypothetical event, or symbolic event. It might have been a local flood, but there's no way, basically, it was an actual full-on worldwide event. Which, if that's a local flood, brothers and sisters, and he ended up in Turkey, that is one heck of a local flood, going from America to Turkey. Okay, so that's a long ways away. I don't buy that for an instant. So bottom line is that this is the area where Noah's posterity had Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? And Ham was married to Egyptus. They became they came here into Africa. They became basically the black race. Then they had Shem. He had the priesthood, and Japheth was blessed by Noah that his seed would exceed all, and they became the Asiatic peoples of the earth. So this is how that kind of broke up. If you follow Shem's line down, you have Abraham, who has a son by the name of Isaac, and because of Abraham's unflinching obedience to God, he is given a special covenant with God, right? And that covenant involves several things. Does it matter where places happen? Does it matter where this happened? Where did it happen? Where did it happen? Where did Abraham go to sacrifice Isaac? Mount Moriah. Where's Mount Moriah? Actually, technically it may not be, but it's in this general region right here. It's pretty close. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, because that goes into some real important things when it comes down to the reestablishment of the daily sacrifice of the Jews. Okay, but that's basically where most of the world thinks it is. And what was this covenant that God made with Abraham? He would bless him with the land, posterity, prosperity, and security. Those four things. Now, how many of you have heard that part already? This part. Okay, how many of you have not heard this part before? This is new for you. How many of you are not voting? Are we all still awake here? No, okay. Anyway, so basically the land itself, posterity, prosperity, and security. It's actually kind of given in that order, okay, according to the Abrahamic covenant. So if you're going to have, what was the purpose of the covenant? Basically, there's actually, I'm going to go back to that real quickly. The purpose of the covenant basically is this. God told Abraham, he says, through thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel, right? So that was Abraham's seed's responsibility to take the gospel to all the rest of his children. So all of Ham's children, all of Japheth's children, and also all of the additional, the people who were between Shem and Israel, right? Or Abraham. So bottom line is he has a huge responsibility in order to be effective in having this missionary work, because that's really what it's all about. In order to be effective in doing this missionary work, you're going to need a land. Why do you need a land? Because you need to have an ability to create a culture of righteousness. The Israelites could not have a culture of righteousness as they lived in Egypt, for example, because Egypt wouldn't allow them to practice their religion, right? We had the same problem in Missouri, right? So we ended up coming out here to Salt Lake City. So the bottom line is that sometimes God has to remove them from a culture of unrighteousness and put them into a place where they can actually establish that so that their children, and they can live their religion the way that they want to live it. So a land is important. Posterity is important because the gospel is spread heart to heart and spirit to spirit. So if you're going to have a powerful missionary force, you need to have missionaries, right? And then third, if you're going to have a powerful missionary force, you're going to have some prosperity, because missionary work is expensive. And not everybody can do it. So God says, I'm going to bless you with all the prosperity that you need to be able to carry out the goal, basically, of having missionary work. And then the fourth thing is security. Because even if you have the first three, if you don't have the last one, if those kids are basically having to serve military instead of missions, you see the problem? So God says, I'll take care of that too. I'm going to put a shield, an iron dome of protection over that covenant land and that covenant people as long as they're on that land. And as long as they are righteous, I'll fight their battles for them. So they don't even have to do that. They can totally focus and concentrate on taking my gospel to all my other kids. Right? So God also blessed Abraham and his posterity. Basically, this gets down to Abraham, who has Isaac, who has Jacob. Jacob has how many sons? 12 sons. Those 12 sons basically take that promised land of Canaan. By the way, it was named Canaan, right? And they divide it up. But there was a couple of sons who didn't get an inheritance. Who were they? Levi didn't get it. That's right. In fact, right here, the tribe of Levi in Deuteronomy says, the priest, the Levites, and all the tribe of Levi shall have no part nor land inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire in his inheritance. Therefore they shall have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, and he has said unto them. So basically, they were to get the temple. So the Levites didn't get any. But if you go back to this, who else didn't get an inheritance? It's Joseph. But see, people say, well, wait a minute, Joseph got a double inheritance because both of his sons got an inheritance. Both Ephraim and Manasseh both got an inheritance. But Joseph didn't get one. Why is that? I thought Joseph was the good one. I mean, wasn't he the good guy? Okay. Why didn't he get an inheritance? Okay, where is his inheritance? It was a promised land. It was above every other land. In the whole world, his was going to be the best promised land because he was the good one. Okay, so bottom line is it was America. But he didn't get an inheritance over here in the old world. So now they have, basically, they divide up. They can't get along very well, so the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, they split up. The 10 tribes in the north and the 2 remaining tribes in the south. And then they get, the northern tribes begin to forget about God and ignore this covenant that God made with Abraham. And according to Isaiah, what happened is that, and this is what actually happened in history, is basically you have the Assyrians came down and attacked the northern tribes of Israel. And at first they actually repelled them and they drove them back out of their lands. And then they bragged about it. And this is how Isaiah basically put down in words how their attitude was in regard to this attack. So he said, the bricks are falling down, but we're going to build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedars. Now, a brick is not as good a material as a hewn stone. What they're saying is that when the Assyrians came down, they destroyed their houses. They literally would hook up with their horses and pull down the walls of their homes, so forth. They said, you know what? We're not going to just rebuild. We're going to rebuild with a vengeance. We're going to rebuild with this boastfulness, basically, that we are Israel and we are awesome and we are not going to be knocked down, and we're going to show the world how great we are. Because we're going to rebuild, not only just rebuild, we're going to rebuild bigger and better and badder than we were before. And so that's what they basically did. They said, we're not going to just build with bricks next time. We're going to build hewn stones. Now, a hewn stone is a better material than a brick is, right? And a cedar tree goes taller and straighter than the sycamore trees. The sycamore trees are the trees that God gave them to work with. But they're going to have imports. They're going to import cedar trees instead, because they think that's better than what God gave them. And then, of course, we know what happened about 7 years later. The Assyrians came back again a second time. This time it didn't go so well for the northern tribe of Israel. And the northern tribes were driven dramatically off of their covenant and promised land. And that covenant promised land was given to them for how long? Forever, according to the Lord himself. So this covenant actually is with the people, but it's also on the real estate itself. Is that still a covenant land? Yes, it is. Whether or not the people are there, it depends on them and their righteousness. Okay, so the Assyrian Empire, basically, they drive off the northern tribes of Israel. Where do they go? They went to the north countries, right? And we don't know a lot about where they went, but we do know some of where they went. We know for sure that some of them went over into basically what is now Russia and that area. Some of them went into what is now Europe and that area. And some of them went someplace where we don't even know where they went. But a vast majority of them probably are not even here among us. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit more. Those of you here a few weeks ago when we had the presentation about the rocks with the rocks and stuff, okay, that's an important baseline understanding to be able to understand some of the things we're going to be talking about a little bit later in this presentation. So, all right. So Lehi and was called out of the southern part, right? He was a southerner, okay. And so the Lord calls his prophet Lehi out. He gives him a special instrument to be able to be led out with, and they leave right around 600 BC, right? But at 586 BC, which is just a few years later, 14 years later, this time not the Assyrians, but the Babylonians come in, and they attack the southern tribes of Israel, and they basically conquer them, and they haul them back as slaves back to Babylon. And this is under King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and basically, so as they do this, so let me ask you a question. How many people are now remaining on the promised land of the Lord given to Abraham and his posterity forever? Yeah, they're gone. So God cannot allow wicked people to remain on promised lands. It just can't happen. This is in the same way that Adam and his posterity were on this promised land, and then they all got basically wiped out by the flood. Here we have the children of Israel. They're on a promised land, and they all get basically wiped out by their neighboring cultures. And then we're going to see in the Book of Mormon two additional examples of people who become wicked on a promised land. And who are they? It's the Jaredites and the Nephites, right? Okay, we're going to talk about that in some depth. So anyway, this is the captivity routes here. How many promised lands are there? Are there dozens of them? The answer to that, I turn to the ultimate authority on promised lands. And you know who that is? That's Jesus Christ. Okay. And when he's with the Nephites, this is what he said, according to 3 Nephi chapter 20. He says, I will remember the covenant which I made with my people. I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in my own due time, give unto them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is what? The land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them for how long? Forever. Okay, so here's Jesus Christ basically saying that Jerusalem is the promised land for his people forever. And they're not even there at this point, at that point in time. So this is Jerusalem. This is where the promised land is. This is the covenant gathering place for the house of Israel, right? Now this is Jerusalem. So this is Canaan over here. This is Canaan over here. And this is Jerusalem's over here. But then Christ said this in the same chapter here in the Book of Mormon. He says, behold, this people will I establish in this land. Well, what land is he in? America. He's in America, right? And we think he's in the United States of America, basically this land. Unto the fulfilling of this covenant which I made with your father Jacob, and it, meaning this land, shall be a what? A new Jerusalem. So now we know, New Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Canaan, Canaan. Does anybody see a pattern developing here? These are the two promised lands. I want you to find out also, we're going to get into this a little bit more a little bit later on, but notice that their juxtaposition basically here, or not juxtaposition, they basically, this one is on one side of the earth, and this one is actually on the other side of the earth. If you actually wrap this around a globe, Israel is almost always in nighttime when the United States is in daytime. That's kind of an interesting thing. You have two promised lands. One of them is always in the light while the other one is in the darkness. Okay? Except for when interesting things happen. And we're going to get into that a little bit in a minute. So these are the lands of promise. These are the covenant lands. Now, there's a whole scripture chase thing, or scripture chain thing, I should say, that we do. Typically, I've got us down to basically one or two slides here to keep it short. But this is from Alma chapter 46. It said, and it came to pass that when he had poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south, the land desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and on the south, a chosen land, and the land of liberty. This land of liberty is understood more clearly when we understand that Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. That is also the Zion that is talked about. This is the land of promise in the Book of Mormon. It's this land of the Book of Mormon. It's a choice land. It's the land of liberty, and all of those things link up. So bottom line, that the promised land is America, right? Is the United States. Is there any difference between freedom and liberty? This is going to be important here in just a minute. I have usually gone to a lot more explanation, but I'm just going to go to the simplest definition, the best definition. We could go into Noah Webster's dictionary and so forth, and he actually got it right, surprisingly. But the clearest definition I've ever seen of the difference between freedom and liberty is actually from the Book of Mormon itself. In 2 Nephi chapter 2, it says, "Wherefore men are free according to the flesh. By virtue of having been born, we're free." Okay? And we're free to choose. Choice number one, liberty and eternal life to the great mediator of all men, or to choose choice number two, captivity and death. So what is the difference between freedom and liberty? Freedom gives us the ability to choose. Liberty is the choice to follow God. And that's the difference. Why is that important? Because in our founding fathers, when they, we haven't been able to find a single solitary instance of any of the founding fathers calling this a land of freedom. What did they always call it? A land of liberty. And what does that mean? That means that we as a nation choose God. We choose to follow God. That's what that means. Freedom basically can be construed as anarchy. Because when everybody can do anything they want to, then that's not good. So freedom in and of itself is important, but the most important thing is when you choose to use your freedom to follow God, and that's called liberty. Okay? So this is a quote by Elder L. Tom Perry. He says, the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. So I love that. He actually gave this talk about 2 months after he received one of my books for Christmas that talks about the United States being the promised land. This is done up in BYU, Idaho, and then it was actually ended up in the Ensign later on that year in 2012. So again, what was this covenant that God made with Abraham? I want you to repeat this with me, okay? So the first thing is the land. Second thing is? Then what? Prosperity. And then? Okay. The reason why I want you to do that is because I want you to get this in your mind, because when a nation begins to reject God and ignore him and forget about this covenant, God cannot continue to bless them with these blessings. And what he does, scripturally speaking, is he always does this. He removes those blessings. He revokes those blessings, and he always does it in reverse order. What does that mean? That means you have phase one, the blessing of security. If the people reject him, he has to basically give them a little bit of a loving nudge back to him, right? By having a breach of their security. So usually that means some kind of an incursion or whatever. And they realize that God's shield of protection, he's not protecting us anymore. Okay? So the shield of protection has been removed. And that gets people's attention. Like, ooh, that doesn't feel so secure anymore. But if they continue on their road to rejection and apostasy, then he has to go to removing their covenant of prosperity. And usually that means, for example, in the Book of Mormon, they talked about how their riches became slippery and nobody could hold on to their riches, right, their money. Okay, so you have a financial issue, because when you take away people's money, it gets their attention. Okay. But sometimes they still just don't get it, and so they basically God has to go to what I call phase 3. Phase 3 is the revocation of the covenant of posterity. And usually that means war and people are going to die. Okay? So in previous cultures and previous civilizations, that's what it meant. So you basically have a depopulation going on. And then the fourth thing, if they still refuse to follow God and live up to their end of the covenant, then God has no other choice but to sweep them off the land. So that's phase 4, the swept off the land part, right? Okay, so when you understand that, then it's really fascinating. Anybody know what this document is we're looking at here? It's the Constitution, and specifically it's the beginning part of it called the preamble, right? And I want you to I'm going to just go through the preamble really quickly here, and I want you to just tell me, can you find the 4 parts of that sacred covenant with Abraham embedded in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States? Basically, it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. I almost want to say amen at the end. Okay? You see it? Do you see all the parts of the covenant? It's all in there. It talks about the nation, the land, the United States of America. It talks about posterity. They want to secure these blessings for their posterity, prosperity. They talked about justice and their general welfare, security, common defense, domestic tranquility. And they sought these blessings by an ordination. And brothers and sisters, what is a ordination? It's a contract between who? Man and God, right? So this is a contract written in the preamble of the founding document of our nation. Between who again? Between us and God. Was this document inspired? Well, who actually is the one that takes credit for this? Who did the Constitution? I mean, who should get credit for it? Was it Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, John Adams? Well, I'll tell you who does take credit for it. None of those guys. You know who takes credit for it? The Lord does. In Doctrine and Covenants section 101, verse 80 says, and for this very purpose have I, who's speaking here? The Lord, established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I, the Lord, raised up unto this very purpose. So here, the Lord's totally taking credit for the Constitution. Okay? And he should. So what is the obligation associated with this covenant? I mean, obviously, if it's a covenant, it's a two-way thing, right? So he says, I'm going to bless you with the land, prosperity, and security. But a covenant's a two-way street. What do we have to give back in return? Well, number one, we have to take the gospel to the other nations of the earth, right? Because that's the mandate, okay? But there's something else that we have to do. As a nation, we have to do this. Yeah, it's just one thing. But that one thing is divided into 10 sub-things. Okay? That's it. Keep the commandments. That's it. The people in the nation don't have to all be full tithing payers. They don't have to all be, temple recommend holders. They just have to live the minimum standard, which is what? The 10 Commandments. And as long as they will live the minimum standard, then all of the blessings are theirs. God cannot withhold any blessings from these people that are living the 10 Commandments. So what are the 10 Commandments? I mean, do we even know them anymore? Hardly. There's been a war against the 10 Commandments going on now for probably 30 years. But there's some really interesting things like, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. How are we doing as a nation and obeying that commandment? Okay? Or how about keeping the Sabbath day holy? We're doing pretty good at that, aren't we? No. How about thou shalt not kill? Well, unless they're not born yet, then it's okay. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet. As a nation, are we living the minimum standard anymore? No. I think you're right. And what happens to nations who refuse to live the minimum standard? They go through that process, right? So this is George Washington on the day of his inauguration in 1789. This was held where? In Washington, D.C.? New York. It was in New York, okay? And this is according to the historical sources. They basically brought out the Gideon Bible. They brought it out there. He put his hand, opened it up. He opened it up specifically to a verse, according to historians, in Genesis. Genesis chapter 49. And some of you may already know this, but basically it's pretty cool. This is, he said, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. So, what is that? Who is Joseph? Where's his land? America. His promised land is America. He went over the wall, over the ocean, and this is his land. And interestingly enough, several of the founding fathers actually talked about, one day there will be a new Jerusalem on this land. Because they understood this is the land of Joseph. This is the inheritance that Joseph got, the most righteous of the 12 sons. And where did this actually take place? Do places matter again? I mentioned that before with that, but this actually matters. This is the St. Paul Cathedral, downtown New York. Now, at the time when George Washington invoked this covenant with God, by the way, how do you know he was invoking a covenant? Where's his hand? Left hand on the verse, according to historical sources, right hand forming a square, which is what are you doing when you're doing that? You're making a covenant with who? Okay. So here's George Washington as the first rightful president of the new United States of America, making a covenant and putting our nation under this covenant with God. And what is the covenant? It's basically the same as the Abrahamic covenant. It's the same covenant that was here with Adam and Eve and their posterity, right? He's re-invoking this covenant anew or afresh. And so this is the St. Paul Cathedral here. Now, interestingly enough, historians have gone back and looked at it, and back in the time when this actually happened, his inauguration, the church actually, the St. Paul Cathedral actually owned, I can't remember, 4 or 5 acres of land right around the church area. Later on, the church ended up selling off some of that land. It got sold, I think, a couple more times. And long story short, basically, is that the land was eventually purchased by a group who wanted to build the new icon of America on that piece of property. They wanted to build the tallest building in the New York skyline. It would actually be the tallest building on earth at the time. But we're America. And building just one of them isn't good enough. We're going to build 2 of them. And we're going to make them look exactly alike. And so they did. And so they began to build, and they actually, you can see the St. Paul Cathedral. This is the spire here. It's kind of an interesting spire. Viewed from another angle, you can see the spire here. What are these 2 big buildings here? The Twin Towers were literally built on the piece of real estate that was owned by the church at the time of the inauguration. So at the time that George Washington placed our nation under a covenant with God, he was standing on the very piece of ground that would ultimately have this happen. Where not just one, but both of these towers were brought low to the dust, right? And really one of the very first ever attacks on the United States on our own soil. Now, whether it was an internal attack or an external attack, it doesn't matter. It was an attack, okay? The bottom line is that both of these towers, the icon of America was brought down. And so they decided, you know what, this was a horrible event. Obviously, all of us, it was just devastating to see this going on. But they had actually, within 24 hours, you had the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, and the Speaker of the House and so forth, and they all joined in a chorus basically saying, we are America, and we are not going to let this bring us down. We are not going to be humbled by this. And in fact, we're going to rebuild. In fact, we're going to rebuild bigger and taller than we did before. We're going to show the world that we are America and we are awesome. And nowhere in there is this part about humbling ourselves before God, because this is a sign. This is a very big sign that God's covenant of protection over this nation is over. The shield of protection has been protecting this nation for its entire time. It has basically been revoked. It's been removed, right? Okay? And so this is what they said. Actually, most of them this is called the Isaiah prophecy. And they actually brought this up. They said the bricks are falling down, but we're going to build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedar trees. They actually said this over and over and over again. Basically, again, invoking Isaiah, saying we're going to rebuild and we're going to rebuild better. Not realizing that Isaiah's real covenant is to show how the Israelites basically had not humbled themselves before God. And so what happened to them 7 years later? They got driven completely off their lands. So this is what's going on here. Now this is the Twin Towers right here. You can see down below here the plaza. This is a little closer view of the plaza. This is actually kind of a close-up view of the plaza here. What are these things down here made out of? These are called pavers, right? What are pavers? They're bricks, basically. They're man-made, right? They make them into bricks and so forth, right? That's what the plaza looked like after the towers came down. The bricks had been thrown down, folks. The bricks are completely in disarray. And interestingly enough, when they got into after the kind of the smoke and everything cleared out and all the dust and everything cleared out, they went in. They thought, the church, there's no hope. I mean, clearly, the church would have been completely knocked down. It was literally, that church sits right at the base of the North Tower, within not even half a block away. Just the sheer blast wave from the collapsing building caused doors and windows and walls to be blasted out of buildings on all sides of the stone church, the St. Paul Cathedral. But they were absolutely amazed and astounded by the fact that when they got in there, the stone church was undamaged. Not even any windows blasted out or any of that kind of stuff. Couple of tiles got blown off the roof, but that was about it. And they started looking for how in the world did it possibly make it? And they said, well, the only thing we can think of is there was a line of really old big trees that stood between the church and the tower. Can I get a drink of water? I'm getting so parched I can hardly. Okay, sorry. Colette, appreciate that. Anyway, but they had this line of old trees, and apparently when the blast wave came down, it hit those old trees so hard it actually ripped some of them right up out of the ground by their roots. But it caused the blast wave to slow down or go over the church, and the church was completely saved by these old trees. In fact, if you take a close look, you can see there's a trunk of one that's laying sideways, and you can see the big root ball sticking up right here. Oh, thank you. You see that? So that one actually got completely blasted all the way over on its side. So, that's interesting. So this is actually the courtyard, so you can see the old tombstones here in the courtyard of the church there. All right. Then they decided that, we have to, this is in 2004, so just a couple of years later. They said we need to honor and remember those who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001 as a tribute to the enduring spirit of what? Freedom. Because now they decided to use this as the new foundation stone for the new tower, which they called the what tower? Freedom Tower. The Freedom Tower. Now wait a minute. How many of you realized by calling it the Freedom Tower, that was a direct affront to God? What it's saying loud and clear is our new building, our tallest skyscraper, the one that was now going to be the iconic structure of America. We are not under your law. We are free to choose, and we choose not to be. This is the Freedom Tower. They didn't call it the Liberty Tower, did they? But yet we have in the harbor in New York, we have this statue holding up a torch, and she's called the what tower? The statue of. We have this bell in Philadelphia, and it's called the what bell? Liberty Bell. Yeah. It's not a freedom bell. It's a liberty bell. We choose God. This says we don't choose God. We're free. Then they also had the sculptor that made this wonderful sculpture here on the bottom of Wall Street, basically showing the mangled roots as they were torn up out of the ground of these old trees. And then they said, you know what, we need to memorialize the fact that these trees saved the old church. And so it was on November 22nd of 2003, somebody donated a 20-foot Norway spruce to the church, and they call it the Tree of Hope. They dug a hole right where one of the oldest, biggest trees were that actually took the brunt of it, and they dug a hole there to plant this tree in its place. By the way, I didn't point this out really, but what kind of a tree is that? Sycamore. It's a sycamore tree. And what kind of trees are we replacing it with? A cedar tree. So where the sycamore was, they're now planting a cedar tree in its place, just like the Isaiah covenant, right? Unfortunately, though, about a year later, they had to come and remove the tree because the tree of hope, as they called it, died. It didn't make the transplant. It's not a good sign when your tree of hope dies, right? Okay. On the top of the Washington Monument, this is what is inscribed up there on the top of this capstone, at the very tippy top of the Washington Monument. And on it says, you can't see it very well, but it's called Laus Deo, or basically, God be with us, or God hear us. That is what they wanted to have on the highest point that will ever be in Washington, D.C. There will never be any buildings built higher than the Washington Monument. That's why if you go to Washington, D.C., there's almost no really skyscrapers like there is in New York and Chicago and so forth. Because by law, no one can ever build a building taller than the Washington Monument, because this is supposed to be the tallest thing, the closest thing to God in Washington, D.C. God be with us. That's what they wanted. But on the new tower, the new Freedom Tower, they had a big ceremony. They had President Obama came out, and they asked him, sign something significant on the toppest beam, the highest beam in the new tower. We want you to sign something on there symbolically, whatever. So what does he write? He says, we remember, we rebuild, we come back stronger. The Isaiah Covenant, again. Written by the hand of the President of the United States on the new icon of America. This is not a good omen, folks. Okay. So this is the new Freedom Tower. More today. Okay. And now, so that was in 2001. What kind of a sign do you think that is? If you take a look at those 4 blessings of the covenant, okay, what would the tower coming down be a sign of? The revocation of the covenant of security, protection, right? So that's phase 1. This is basically God telling us as a nation, if you're looking for the signs, you'll see these signs. But basically, I have to revoke the covenant of security. I've removed the iron dome, the shield of protection over this nation, and you are now going to be on your own, unless you repent and turn back to me, which I don't see happening since then, right? For a while we did, but actually it came back pretty fast. So then, all of you know what a Shemitah year is, because you've all been well educated with other speakers. So a Shemitah cycle, the 7-year cycles used by the Lord in his Hebrew calendar system that he basically outlined for the Hebrews, right? Okay, so the 7 years is a really important thing, and that's going to be real important as we get down to the signs of the times of today, because the 7-year thing is real critical to understand. Okay, so the 7 years cycle basically is this: every 7 years, if I owed Colette money, if she owed me money, it would just be forgiven, but also.
Don't go any further than that.
Okay, right here.
Get in front of the screen and it kind of crops off.
Okay, okay, yeah. So basically, so there's a forgiveness there, but also, see, we all have our weekly Sabbath, so we have 6 days to work and we have a week to rest, right? But what about the earth? Did the earth need a Sabbath? Yeah, Adam and Eve created the earth for 6 days, and what did he do on the 7th day? The earth rested. And so as a memorial to that, every 7th year, they're not supposed to plant or harvest. And they can kind of harvest what comes up naturally, but they're not supposed to basically work the earth and let the earth have its Sabbath. Okay, so these 7-year cycles are real important, okay? And the bottom line is that 7 years after 9/11, you have 2008. What happened in the fall of 2008? Almost to the day of 9/11. The largest stock market crash in U.S. history, right? And it's interesting because the stock market in 2008 occurred on September 29, 2008. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 777 points. What is significant about that? The number 7 is the number for judgment in Hebrew lexicon, basically. So 777 means judgment, judgment, judgment. Wow, that's a little intense. Okay. So the stock market crash of 2008, by the way, now we've had bigger stock market crashes since then, and the stock market right now is just like at all-time highs, right? So who cares about this? Well, what is the purpose of it? The purpose, brothers and sisters, is it's a sign. It's a sign. It's not saying that this is now the end of the prosperity part, right? But it's the sign that is about to happen, or it is in the process of happening. Is there anything that indicates that 2008 was in fact a worse than we thought of? It's much worse than just the stock market crash? What would we look for if we were trying to see how is America doing financially? What's one of the ways you can find out? You look at the gross debt, right? If you want to know how you're doing financially, how much debt do you have? That's going to be an important question, right? Okay. So how much debt does America have? Well, if you take a look at the national debt, this is the total public debt. And by the way, I am going to fix that. It's kind of driving me nuts that my slides are not quite fitting on the screen there. So just give me 1 second here. Let's get it down here. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's better. So if you take a look at this, so this is 1982 right here, right? So where were we at then? And this is 2008, right? So it comes along here, and then you have 2006, 2008 is basically right here. Did anybody see a change in the overall direction? Okay, now this one only goes up to about 2011, 2012. This one goes up to 2015. You see where 2008 falls? Right here. At 2008, things are going like this, and now all of a sudden it's going like this. What has the national debt done since then? Has it gotten better or worse? Worse. Exponentially worse. They don't even talk about it anymore. It's so bad. There's basically no way that we can ever repay it. What happens when you get to that point in your own life to where you have so much debt that you cannot repay it? You have to have a reset, right? Yeah. That's interesting. What's been being talked about lately?
A reset.
A bankruptcy. All right. How the national debt has grown. Again, this is 2008. You can see again that, in just about every chart you look at, if you're looking at the national debt, 2008 is the place, the fulcrum point where basically it goes from this trajectory to this trajectory, and it's pretty much across the board. 7 years later, I got to stop for just a second. So 7 years later, there were those. Now I have to give some credit here where credit is due. Jonathan Cahn. If you ever heard of Jonathan Cahn, he's a Messianic Jew. Basically, has a huge group out in by Washington D.C. area. Or I guess it's closer by New York anyway. Yeah, New Jersey. But anyway, but he's the one that actually found a lot of this information I'm sharing with you right now is to happen. In 2015, though, he made all kinds of predictions, basically, that we are going to have a financial meltdown. We're going to have, the economy is going to completely fall apart in 2015. It's another 7-year cycle. And 2015 came and went, and what happened? Nothing. There was no meltdown. Everything seemed to be fine. He had a little bit of kind of egg on his face, and the only reason why is because he was looking for the wrong sign. If we have the understanding of the land, posterity, prosperity, and security, phase 1, revocation of the covenant of security, revocation of the covenant of prosperity. So what's the next one? Posterity. So is there anything that happened that would affect the posterity of the United States of America that happened in basically the fall of 2015?
Gay marriage.
Same-sex marriage. Now, no matter what the position is on same-sex marriage, the bottom line is that going to affect how many children are going to be created? Absolutely it will. But not only that, so you had the Supreme Court really makes the same-sex marriage a right nationwide. It's a big yay from the New York Times. And then this is then the Senate votes the Senate vote to defund Planned Parenthood fails. So they were going to defund Planned Parenthood, but apparently our gutless, some of our gutless Congress people basically decided to go ahead and refund Planned Parenthood, which by their own admission, somewhere around 30 million children will never have an opportunity to take their first breath on the promised land of America. Yeah, in the past, God has had to bring in other nations and create war and so forth to reduce the population, basically. In our case, God doesn't even need to do it. We're killing our own kids. So he doesn't even need to bring in another nation to kill us. We're already busy doing it. But we do it very sterilely, see? So we don't see it happening every day, but every day thousands of children across this nation are are brutally killed. So Senate votes down plan to strip Planned Parenthood funds. And what is the reaction to that? That's the sign. So what is the reaction to the sign? What happens after God makes the sign happen? Then you basically take a look and see what happens after that, right? Well, what happened after that? Well, U.S. fertility rate is now at the lowest point since records began in 1909. They said that America's birth rate is now a national emergency. U.S. fertility rate reaches a new record low. Babies are not being created, and those that are being created, many of them are being killed. So we have a really a shortage of children going on here. If it wasn't for immigration, we would actually be below sustainment levels. You have to have 2.1 children per couple just to maintain a population. And basically, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, Stephen Smoot, my dear friend Stephen Smoot, he did a couple of videos called the Demographic Bomb and Demographic Winter. And in this, he has some of the top people in the world. And he said, basically, there has never, ever been any civilization that has prospered at the same time as they have depopulation. There is a direct correlation to the wealth of a nation and its ability to have children. Simple as that. And they can show it in every kind of demographic. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. And they think they can show that. In fact, it was his film that actually ultimately, it was shown at the United Nations. And then they actually ended up showing it to China. He got a bunch of them to the Chinese leaders. And that's when, after they saw that film, they realized that they have made a huge mistake, killing all the babies, and they actually changed the one-child policy after seeing that film. Yes. That film, well, I mean, there's not just that one thing. I mean, it's obviously it's a whole bunch of things, but it was one of the big catalysts that really caused the Chinese to go, we're making a huge mistake here. Which also brings us to another issue. If you have been killing all of the kids except for one per family, and your culture basically says that you don't have really a posterity unless you have a male, progenitor, right, or whatever, right? So who's getting killed the most? The girl babies. So now they have something in the neighborhood of, I think it was 30 million young men that will never have an opportunity to have a family or be married. What do you do with 30 million frustrated young men? You make a powerful army. Okay, so just saying. And those kids now are all adults and so forth now, right? So this is Mormon chapter 8. I think this is really important because in the Book of Mormon, essentially, people need to realize that this Book of Mormon is so precious for us, for our day, to understand what's going on. In the video that I showed at the beginning, President Hinckley said that the Book of Mormon is more current than the daily news. And for a little bit, I was kind of going, wait a minute, how could the Book of Mormon be more current than the daily news, which, if something happens in Indonesia, we know about it in 2 minutes on our phone, right? So how could a 2,000-year-old book be more current than that? And I finally realized the reason why President Hinckley is absolutely right is because the news can only tell us what has happened. The Book of Mormon can tell us what's going to happen. How could the Book of Mormon know this? Well, he actually tells us, Mormon does. Actually, technically, this is Moroni speaking here. It's in Mormon chapter 8, but at the beginning of the chapter he says, now I, Moroni, do make a statement or whatever. So he's talking about this, but he says, behold, I speak unto you as if you were present, yet you were not. But behold, Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know your doing. What is that? What is that? This Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know your doing. So who showed him? The Lord did, right? Why would this be important? Because these were the last two individuals to abridge the plates. My personal belief is that both Mormon and Moroni were shown us. They were shown our civilization from beginning to end, from stem to stern. So they could actually go to their history, pull out those parts of their history that would be apropos for us. Those things that we needed to know about from that. So it says, and I know that you do walk in the pride of your hearts. Whoops, let's see, go back to here. And there are none save only a few who do not lift up themselves in pride and so forth. So they talk about fine apparel and envying and strife and malice and persecutions and all manner of iniquities. He says, in your churches, yea, even every one have become polluted because of the pride of your hearts. Well, clearly he's not talking about us, though, right? Okay, well, we're going to get there in just a second. Okay, but the bottom line is you have this Book of Mormon prophetic parallels timeline. This is from the Stoddards, and this is and essentially because they were shown us, they actually made the Book of Mormon chronologically so that it matches up with the United States. These are parallel histories. The United States of America and the Book of Mormon have history that basically parallels every aspect of it. All the way from when you start off with the Book of Mormon, you have people who are being persecuted because of their religion. They build ships. They come to a promised land in America. When they get here, what do? They form a new form of government, called the Laws of Mosiah and so forth, right? Okay. Well, now if you fast forward to America, basically, you have people who are being persecuted because of their religion. They build ships. They come to a promised land in America. They form a new form of government called the Constitution. You see the parallels there? Then you even have parallels with Joseph Smith and Abinadi. Then you have parallels where you have whole chunks of time are handled in just a few paragraphs. But when you get right up until the time of Christ, then all of a sudden you have this amazing detail, even down to the very letters being written between the military commanders and the prophets and so forth, right? You have Moroni and Peharan and so forth, and you have the letters written back and forth from the from the Gadianton robbers and from the kingmen and so forth. So you have, and this is another interesting aspect of it. Basically, who were the enemies of the Nephites? Primarily, the Lamanites, right? But how often did the Lamanites actually go and instigate a war all on their own to come kill the Nephites? Hardly ever. Usually it was dissenting Nephites, okay, because the Lamanites would get stirred up and then come and do it. Who are some of the other Nephite people that they had to fight? The Gadianton robbers, right? Now, with the Gadianton robbers, were they involved in their government very much? Kinda, but actually they didn't really care so much about the government. They were equal opportunity terrorists, okay? Because they harassed the Lamanites the same as they did the Nephites. They didn't seem to care. As long as the only thing that mattered to them was wealth, was power and money, right? They didn't really even care about power that much. They just wanted to have the money, and they got other people to participate in their spoils, right? Okay, but now who were the kingmen? They were Nephites, but what was their goal? Take over the government, right? So you had three different groups, and sometimes Captain Moroni, he was really pretty concerned because they were having to focus on two of the groups, which were kind of more internal, while their main enemy, the Lamanites, basically they couldn't even worry about them because they were having to worry about the kingmen trying to overthrow their government, and then these scumbag. I think of them kind of like the mafia, okay, or ISIS. These are extra, national organizations. They don't really care about borders and so forth. Their main goal is basically, we're going to do like what most terrorist organizations do. We're going to terrorize a place, and then we will offer you to not be terrorized if you pay us. See how that works? So if you want to not be terrorized, then pay us. And that's how that works. That's how the mafia works. That's how all these. That's basically the secret combination is talking about there. On this scale, we're right before Christ comes.
Right before what?
Christ comes.
Second coming down the bottom?
Yeah. Second coming is basically the Nephites defeat in war. Nephite rejects his signs. More wicked. Christ visits the Nephites right here. Second coming right here. So basically, the more wicked are destroyed. The judgments are coming upon the wicked here. Nephites reject the signs. The moderns are going to reject the signs. The Nephites have defeats in war. We have military defeats, basically, in our, where we don't win the wars. We just kind of fight them, and then the government doesn't even let them really win, right? Okay, so the interesting thing about this is that right before Christ comes, you have all this major detail. And this is what I thought was really fascinating. So what happened was I was looking at, for example, here in Helaman chapter 7. It says, it tells us what's going on in their culture. If the Book of Mormon is a parallel history of us, then wouldn't it be interesting to know how well do we compare, right? And so this is what some of the things that Jesus Christ showed Mormon or Moroni, okay, was happening in their culture right before Christ comes. And so what I did is I took actually each one of these different phrases, take it and put it into a Google search and look under mainstream media headlines. And just to see what would come up if we did that. And I'm telling you what, I was astounded by what was found here. So basically they said that seeing the people in a state of such awful wickedness. We're pretty much getting used to that now in the United States, right? I mean, they actually have stopped kind of covering it because it's just happening all over the place. People are just, it's just happening. This is just a peaceful protest here going on. Okay. This is a few years ago. This is actually in downtown Salt Lake City, the gay parade. The largest gay gathering and parade in the United States happens in Salt Lake City. These are Mormons building bridges. These are all LDS people fighting for gay rights and so forth, which is interesting. And those Gadianton robbers filling the judgment seats. Whoa. America's political system thrives on corruption. These are some of the articles that came up. Okay, so I'm just kind of showing you what some of those are. U.S. judges see an epidemic of prosecutorial misconduct in the state, L.A. Times. The deep state wears black robes. This is about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh debacle and hearings and so forth, with a completely unsubstantiated assault on his character that even that lady's friends couldn't even back up anything. It's totally a lie. And bottom line is that, so this is the deep states wearing black robes. Having usurped the power and authority of the land, overreaching judges imperil national security and weaken the Constitution, laying aside the commandments of God. Are we doing that? Supreme Court bars commandments from courthouses. Federal judge orders 10 commandments removed from Dixie Courthouse. Oklahoma Supreme Court orders 10 commandments removed. Supreme Court backs removal of 10 commandments monuments. And 8 out of 10 times the commandments monuments have been removed. The only time when they've been actually allowed to remain is, it's a historical document. It has nothing to do with what's good and bad. It has to do with just, it's our history, so let's just keep it up, right? If you were going to destroy the nation under a covenant with God, and if the main thing that nation has to do is obey the commandments, if you were Satan, what would you want to do? Make it so that they can't even remember their end of the deal. So they take away the 10 commandments, right? Okay, so not in the least right before him. I was wondering what was going to come up when I put that in the Google search. This is what came up. Americans worry about moral decline but can't agree on what's right and what's wrong. Jeez. America's accelerating decay. The steepening decline is evident in the family, education, morality, and art. National Review. Majority of Americans believe the U.S. is in moral decline. From Gallup. And no justice unto the children of men. No justice. I thought, well, if you have a bunch of Gadianton robbers basically in the judgment seats, then that would give you no justice, right? And I thought, well, I wonder what would come up when this happened. And this is what one of the things that came up. Executive branch criminal activities by presidential administration. If you take a look at criminal indictments, criminal convictions, and prison sentences, Barack Obama had 0. George Bush had 16, 16, and 9. Bill Clinton had 1. George Bush had 1. Ronald Reagan had 16, 26, and 8. Okay, so, and Richard Nixon had a whole ton of them. So bottom line is that clearly Republicans break the law a lot more than Democrats do. Unlaw-abiding. Okay. Well, I mean, the fact is right here in front of us, folks. I mean, Republican presidencies have 91 times the convictions of Democratic presidencies. Do you suppose it's because they're 91 times more wicked? Or do you think maybe the judicial system is rigged? In fact, it says Republicans go to jail, Democrats run free. Sanctuary cities. Cities just choosing to ignore the national law. Say, no, that's a law we just don't want to obey. What happens when you get enough people who say, I just don't want to obey a particular law? It's called anarchy, right? They don't want to obey it. So you have all these different people saying we got to defund, abolish ICE, defund ICE, abolish the police, and so forth, condemning the righteous because of their righteousness. Wow, is that heaven? Persecution of Christians is on the rise, Americans say, Washington Times. Letting the guilty and the wicked go unpunished because of their money. Now, I was really interested to see what was going to come up with this one. Okay, and this is not necessarily trying to be political, but I mean, the bottom line, this is what came up. And this is ABC News, why Hillary deleted 33,000 emails and still is not behind bars. But you have this other old guy who basically just happens to have said something wrong, or they claim he lied one time to the Congress, and they come out there with 25 SWAT guys in the middle of the night and drag him out of his house and prosecute the crap out of him and so forth. But just for one time lying to Congress, which they do all the time. People, even when you're doing your own testimony, sometimes you forget stuff. You leave one little detail out. In Christ's time, he knew a lot of those lawyers. Basically, he talked about the lawyers were trying to trick him by asking him certain questions. There's ways you can question people to get results that basically will contradict. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're basically trying to do. Justice Department, James Comey deviated from protocol in the Clinton emails probe. How did he deviate? Well, he drafted a statement ending the Clinton email investigation months before he even interviewed her. FBI confirms, Newsweek. Daily Caller, was the Obama Department of Justice weaponized to spy on the Trump campaign? You think? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff that have been coming out. And where are the indictments? Where are these people being thrown in jail? Nobody is. Now, President Trump has had almost 300 new conservative judges. What are they doing? Are they just not getting the cases? What's going on? How come they're not indicting anybody? A politically weaponized FBI is nothing new, but plenty dangerous. Held in office as the head of government to rule and do according to their wills that they might get gain and glory of the world. Get gain and glory of the world. I thought that was an interesting aspect of it. So this is actually the net worth of presidents of the United States. This is Richard Nixon. This is how much he was worth before he was president. This is how much he was worth after. He made 650% increase in his overall wealth. Ford had 400%. Carter had 200%. Reagan had 45% increase in his wealth. Bush had 475%. Here's Clinton. Well, I couldn't get him on the chart here because so I wanted you to be able to see this down here, so I had to then blow it out so you can actually see the chart. Yeah, Bill and Hillary, they managed to get from here. This is their wealth before their presidency to 6,150% increase in their net worth over the course of the presidency. Gee, that's pretty amazing. And Obama's not even on there. This is too old for that. Yeah. Okay, the Washington Post, how the Clintons went from dead broke to rich. Bill earned $104 million just in speeches for 1 year. How Bill and Hillary Clinton made $240 million in the last 15 years. Fortune, how Bill and Hillary Clinton parlayed decades of public service into vast wealth. How much money can ex-presidents pull in? Here's a hint. One increases net worth by 6,150%. Forbes, how Barack Obama has made $20 million since arriving in Washington. That they might the more easily commit adultery. How does that make it more easy to commit adultery? Well, this is interesting. U.S. leads the way in porn production, but falls behind in profits. Despite the fact that estimated 89% of porn is made in the U.S. of A., China, South Korea, and Japan are pulling the most money from it. Kind of ticking off the porn producers here in the U.S. because we're making all the porn, but they're getting all the money from it. Dang it. We're now the greatest purveyor of porn to the world. How we ended up with 40% of children being born out of wedlock. Special report. This is 1 in 4 Americans don't think one-night stands count as cheating. Notice who the news organization is here. Yeah, Deseret News, special report. 25% of Americans think that a one-night stand is not cheating. Wow. About Matt Lauer and his sexual misconduct interviews, Anthony Weiner gets for sexting with a teenager. Is female infidelity on the rise? Says, let's see, drawing the interest of researchers and media lately is the possibility that the percentage of wandering wives is catching up to that of unfaithful husbands. And they actually come up and they actually say, is anyone faithful anymore? Infidelity in the 21st century? And the answer to that is not many. When you have a constant barrage of every TV show and every sitcom that every kid and every adult watches all the time, and there's not one time where they mention anybody being married or waiting until they get married before they have sexual relations, that kind of stuff, that's not even heard anymore. Yeah.
I heard an interview with the Cosmopolitan main editor, and she said it was mostly all made up in the 70s and 80s, the sexual revolution, making it seem like all these women were having to escapade. She said, you know, she came out basically and is recanting and saying, you know, horrible, seeing what happened.
Mm-hmm.
These stories that were all false, they're just made up.
Yep. So much lying going on, it's just ridiculous. You have even people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page who are working basically against the President Trump, or candidate Trump at the time. And what were they doing? They're having a little affair on the side too, right? Okay. That they might more easily commit adultery and steal. So how is stealing going on in the United States? Identity theft hit an all-time high in 2016. Oh, but that was eclipsed in 2017 as it hit a new record high. Oh, but that was eclipsed by 2018 when you had the new record highs. And every year it continues to go up and up and up. It's always a new record high every year for identity theft. It's getting too hard to actually break into people's homes. Well, unless you're rioting, then it makes it a little bit easier. But otherwise, when the cops are around, it's pretty hard to, because people have security systems and so forth now. And then it says to steal and to kill. Actually, killing has been way down. Did you know that? Whoops, come on. After 2 years of increases, the U.S. murder rate officially fell in 2017. Unless you figure into it the abortions. So let's take a look at abortions. So here's Planned Parenthood killed 321,384 babies in abortions last year. And Planned Parenthood celebrates the killing of 7.6 million babies in abortions. FBI signals criminal probe into Planned Parenthood's trafficking of aborted baby parts when they actually got caught selling the aborted baby parts, right? And so forth. And so they paid a total of $7.8 million. You know what part of the budget that is for them? That's a nothing burger for them. That's not even barely even a slap on the wrist for what they did. And doing according to their own wills. Facebook is accused of censoring conservatives, report says. Prairie University's Facebook is ratcheting up its censorship of conservatives. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They are totally censoring all conservatives. I had an opportunity to have about 3 different opportunities to go and talk with Glenn Beck and show him some of the information I'm going to share with you here in the next hour or so. But Glenn basically was just saying, it's just a matter of time before I'm shut down. Yeah. They already try everything they can to try to do it. It's not even, they're just openly doing it now. And they don't care. Okay? Shadow banning, how Twitter secretly censors conservatives. Yet Twitter censoring the President of the United States' tweets. So who has the greater power? That's why we got to watch Glenn's show tonight and find out a little bit more about this these tech companies, because they're all in the can for a new world order. and many of them are actually on the pay of a guy by the name of George Soros, which we're going to talk to you a little bit more also. So, censorship of conservatives is out of control at Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Social media algorithms suggest internet bias and towards progressive ideologies. Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are all basically censoring conservative stuff. Where do our kids get almost all of their information today? From these platforms. What is the chances that they're going to grow up conservative values? Not unless they basically are getting a boatload of it at home. Because everything they're going to see online is going to be skewed to the progressive side. Everything.
So there could be some really positive things happen when the world gets all crazy.
Yeah. Well, when Christ comes, it's going to get real positive. Well, let's talk about that here in just a second. So Google bosses upset over Trump election victory. These guys were so, when Trump won the presidency 4 years ago, they were just crying that we should have done more. Well, if they saying that they should have done more, what does that say? That they were doing something, right? Okay. Former NPR CEO opens up about liberal media bias. Liberal professors outnumber conservatives 12-1. This study finds. So 12 times more liberal professors than there are conservative ones in our colleges. Higher education is deeper sickness. Okay, this is interesting. Resistance royalty. Pelosi, Soros headline the left's biggest dark money conference. When I say dark money, what does that mean?
Secretive.
Secretive money. Whose money?
Soros.
George Soros. George Soros in 2017 donated $3 billion to progressive causes. That's with a B, not an M, right? It's not a million, that's just $3 billion. But in 2018, he decided he needed to up the ante a little bit, so he was upping it to $18 billion he's given away to progressive groups and progressive causes. But he needs to know who the most progressive causes are and who he's going to give his money to. So he held a big conference where he basically invited all of those who want to feed at his trough, right, to come and basically pitch their best deal as to what they're going to use the money for and how they're going to affect change. This conference was actually called Beyond Resistance. If you're going beyond just resistance, what are you doing? You're talking about just, if I just resist somebody, like if I'm resisting arrest, right? Okay. What happens if I go beyond resisting?
You're attacking.
I'm attacking. Yeah. This is attacking, okay? Exactly. It says reclaiming our progressive future. Okay? And who are some of the speakers? This actually got leaked. It was supposed to be a really secret hush-hush thing. They told everybody, don't even print anything out, just come to the conference, whatever. And somebody actually went in there, somebody actually printed out, and they got the printing out. And here it is, Beyond Resistance. Here's some of the people who were speakers here at the trough of George Soros, getting his money. John Stocks, DA Board Chair, National Education Association, the NEA. What would one of the highest ranking people in our education system be doing at a George Soros funding event? Oh, man. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, if you have your kids still in public schools, you need to get them out today. Or they will not have a hope of ever having your values. I hate to put it that way, but I mean, there's people who are not of our faith, basically saying, you know what, the United States education system is completely worthless. It'd be better off if they didn't learn most of the stuff that they're learning. And they're not teaching them anymore the basics. They're teaching them how many different ways you can sexually identify yourself. 60-something different ways. Right? This is what they're having to learn and memorize in their classes. Some of this stuff. Okay. Here we have a program, How to Make Climate Progress in the Age of Denial. For people who deny climate change, we got to attack them. These are some of the people and their organizations who do that. They had of course, they had the talk with George Soros. You also had the Honorable Nancy Pelosi from the U.S. House of Representatives was there to get her little piece of the action. Okay. So what is it all about? In fact, I'm going to share with you something that's real important. This is actually something that Glenn Beck dug out, and I had a lot of people asking me questions. Well, where does George Soros, I mean, he's giving away $18 billion. Where do you get that kind of money?
Oh, he shorts the markets. He knows what chaos.
Yeah.
He makes it.
Well, and I thought it was all from his philanthropy stuff and basically his knowledge of the stock market. But there's a lot of smart people out there that play the stock market, and they're not making billions and billions of dollars, enough so they can actually give it away. Where's he getting his money from? Glenn Beck actually answered. If you go to YouTube, it's on. Glenn Beck has a thing. It's called the Democrat Hydra. The Democrat Hydra. And he gives it, outlines step by step how this works. And basically it goes like this. When there were still a few republics left in the world, like Venezuela and Ukraine and so forth, they would identify one of these constitutional republics, basically patterned after the United States Constitution, and they would basically identify countries who had a lot of natural resources. And then they would target that country. And what they would do is Soros would go in, like, let's say $3 billion. They go into Ukraine with $3 billion. They go into the universities and find some progressive liberal students who basically don't like their country or whatever, and they start paying them to go out and have meetings and recruit other students until they get about 20,000 or so students. They have a big group of students. Basically, they're all on kind of the payroll. They're not getting paid much to get something for their meetings and so forth, right? But the bottom line is then they wait till something happens in the country that they can actually protest over. So let's say somebody gets shot or whatever. They try to make it a race thing or a sexual orientation thing or a woman and man thing or whatever. Some way to divide the country up somehow. And then basically then they tell them, okay, now you guys got to go out and you got to protest. But you can't just protest because that doesn't get on the news. You got to get on the news or you don't get paid. Okay, so they'll go out and shut down an airport or shut down a freeway or do something to tick people off enough that it causes the news to come out and say, what's going on? Well, when people start seeing us on the news every night, night after night, they go, man, I didn't realize it was such a problem in our country. But it must be because, gosh, you got these riots, these not riots necessarily, but these protests going on all over the place. So then they kind of start feeling like, well, gosh, maybe we should join in the thing because, I don't want to discriminate. I don't want to be a discriminator person, so I'm going to go join the deal. Well, as they do this, they start to get it more and more radicalized until they actually do start having real riots and so forth. And then they start to destabilize their biggest cities. They start to shut down the commerce. Why are big cities there? Because that's where the commerce happens, right? So they try to shut down and get people to stop coming in there and so forth. And basically, after you get a certain number of cities, it starts to destabilize their currency. Oh, and then they've got an answer for them, right? So what happens is as soon as their currency starts to get destabilized and it starts to go radically going up and down, then they basically come in and say, listen, your currency is really unstable. We're going to fix that. We're the World Bank. And we're going to come in here and we're going to guarantee your currency. We're going to guarantee the loans. But you got to have some kind of collateral. What kind of collateral do you have? Oh, you have natural resources. Oh, it's too bad because the natural resources, they're in the hands of the private sector. You have companies and people who own that stuff. The oil and the gas and the coal and so forth. Tell you what, just nationalize that stuff, put it all into one organization, and then you can use that as the collateral to back your loans to stabilize your currency. Boom, everything's fixed. All you have to do is just nationalize all your natural resources. The company that they chose to have the one that would actually do that and oversee that in Ukraine is called Burisma. You ever heard of Burisma? Yep. Who's on the board of Burisma?
Hunter Biden.
Well, Hunter Biden has so much wonderful experience in oil and gas and Ukrainian culture and so forth, right? Why are they paying him millions of dollars every year for his expertise when he has none?
Pay to play.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, you can figure that one out. That's not too hard to figure out, right? So bottom line, so what happens? So they basically milk the country's wealth through their natural resources, which is basically where everything comes from. Because this is what God put into the ground. And everything stems from what God put into the ground. Everything. Right? So when you control that, basically you control all of that. And so George Soros, for his paltry $3 billion investment to get all those kids on the hook and get them to go out and riot and so forth, he's receiving back $300 billion in guarantees from the Burisma back to him and the World Banking Consortium. So all that is outlined by Glenn Beck. He's awesome, but it's called the Democrat Hydra. That's where he's getting his money from, folks, and we need to understand where this is happening. Okay. Well, with that kind of money, I mean, yeah, you can buy anything. You can buy all kinds of stuff. But that's not. But the real estate isn't what's making his big thing. Show me any real estate deals that are getting, from $3 billion to $300 billion. That's a what's that? 1,000% increase. I mean, show me a real estate deal where you can get 1,000% return in 1 or 2 years. Not happening. All right. So amid Google scandals, Soros-backed plan to censor the web. Executive branch overreach. Where's the judges? Obama's curtain call. Look back at the legacy of executive overreach. President shouldn't set Congress the agenda. We no longer have 3 branches of government because they're all overstepping each other. They're not clearly defined anymore. And last thing, and this great iniquity had come upon the Nephites in the space of not many years. And where did it actually come from? I speak unto you as if you're present. You remember Christ showed in this, right? You walk in the pride of your hearts. You find peril, envy, and strife, persecutions, iniquities, and so forth. Let's get to the timeline. Okay, this is about the sex scandals within the church there. Do you need to go into this one? You love your money and your substance, and you find apparel. This is from Mormon. This one is real important. He says, "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites." This is a couple of verses after he just got through saying that Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know you're doing, right? What did Christ show him? Christ showed him this. He says, "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers, who sell yourselves for that which will canker. Why have ye polluted the holy church of God?" Whoa, now wait just a minute here. Who was the holy church of God? I don't think he's talking about the Baptists here. So who was the holy church of God? And he didn't say it might get polluted. He said it has been polluted. And who showed it to him? Christ. This is an interesting question. Who did the polluting? Who was it? He tells us. The teachers who sell themselves. If you're selling yourself, well, you're getting paid, right? For that which will canker. What kind of things canker? Things that don't last canker. Swords that were made out of steel, they canker with rust, right? So these are things that don't last. So these are people who are getting paid to teach stuff that aren't going to last, which means it's not from God. It's the precepts of men. They said nothing about the brethren here, but there's somebody who is in this holy church of God that is actually causing a loss. Basically, that they're polluting it, right? So I'm not going to say, yeah, I'll let you figure out who you think that is. But I don't think it's the gospel doctrine teachers because number one, they're not getting paid. Okay, and I don't think it's there's lots of people there. I think something's going crazy there. All right, this next part though says why. Okay, this is so awesome, but I don't think we have time to really go over it, so we'll just have to, if you want to take a picture of it, whatever, that's fine. But this is a talk that President Nelson did. He basically said we have to understand the creation, the fall, and the atonement. We can't understand the atonement without first understanding the fall, and we can't understand the fall unless we understand the creation. Creation is really important, right? Yeah.
Who are those teachers? The Pharisees?
I'm going to have you figure it out. I'll just tell it this way. They're people who are members of the church because they're obviously part of the holy church of God, right? They're getting paid and they're teaching stuff that's not true. I mean, okay. I'm not going there because it's not just BYU. I mean, but bottom line, there are scholars who are getting paid to teach the philosophies of men, not even mingled with Scripture. Okay, and I'll just put it that way. Okay, that's my personal opinion, though. Okay, so. Well, no. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm just telling you that, and most of you probably already know that there's major things going on. If you have any kids or grandkids going to even BYU or really any of these schools, many of them are still taught by, LDS professors and so forth. But they're being taught that Adam and Eve weren't real, that basically the earth is not as the Book of Mormon, or as the creation accounts talk about, that Noah's flood didn't really happen, that we came from apes and slime and lower life forms through the process of evolution. They're being taught socialism and communism and basically every other kind of ism besides constitutionalism. Okay, and so these are all things that are going on even within our own universities here in Utah. And of course, it's even worse. Well, it's not even worse. I got to tell you. Well, I'll tell you in just a second because I'm going to get to that point here. But this is another thing though that actually reiterates that President Nelson, he totally gets all this. Okay, this is a talk that he gave. He said the Book of Mormon reveals that the inheritance of Joseph's side of Israel was not forgotten when land was distributed to the tribes of Israel as promised in the Abrahamic covenant. Joseph didn't get the inheritance, right? This is President Nelson is reiterating that. He didn't get an inheritance of land over there. He says Joseph's inheritance was to be a land choice above all other lands. It was choice not only because of its beauty or wealth of natural resources, but it was choice because it was chosen to be the repository of sacred writings on gold plates from which the Book of Mormon would one day come. And where did the Book of Mormon come forth out of the ground? Mesoamerica, okay. Okay. But this land it was choice because it would eventually host the world headquarters of the restored Church of Jesus Christ in the latter days. And where is that? Salt Lake City. And it is choice because it is the land of liberty by those who worship the Lord and do what? Keep his commandments. All throughout the Book of Mormon. You keep my commandments, you'll prosper on the land. You keep my commandments, you're going to, you'll have posterity and so forth, right? It's all throughout the Book of Mormon. The covenant is over and over and over again. And he tells us exactly what we need to do. But we're not really doing it. I love this quote. This is... What's that? Actually, almost all of his talks that he's done well, not all of them, but probably 70% of his talks that he's done when he was going all over the place. Just look up any of those talks. They're all pretty similar, and most of them have that in it. He said it over and over and over again. This is not like the one-time deal. It's not a one-off deal, okay? I don't know if you've seen this or not. This is Hugh Nibley. He says, we have met here today. This is at a graduation ceremony at BYU. We met here today clothed in the black robes of a false priesthood. How many of you ever heard that one before? How many of you have heard the rest of what he said? This is so awesome. Okay, he says, most of you are here today only because you believe that this charade will help you get ahead in the world. In a forgotten time, before the Spirit was exchanged for the office and inspired leadership for ambitious management, these robes were designed to represent withdrawal from the things of this world, as the temple robes still do. That we may become more fully aware of the real significance of both is my prayer. That is so profound, right? Then a couple of years ago, we had my friend Dean Sessions with the Universal Model. I actually ran a full-page ad about our expo going on in the Daily Universe at BYU. And basically, this is the response that we had the week after that, in the next edition. This is a response to just one person that I was showing that was going to be speaking at our conference, and it's from everybody from here on down. These are all their credentials: PhD, geology master's degree students and faculty and so forth, and they're all taking huge umbrage. And basically, this is what it comes down to. This is a direct quote from their article in the Daily Universe. It says, students in the BYU community reminded that organic evolution, anthropogenic climate change, radiometric dating, and a 4.56 billion year old age of the earth are all seriously taught on campus by professors in good standing with the church in fields directly related to these subjects. Daily Universe. This is really interesting. They had a poll to see who would win if among these particular candidates right here. Bernie Sanders. If the poll were, if you were to vote for in the general presidential election today, who would you vote for? At BYU, Bernie Sanders would have won by a landslide victory over Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump down here. Okay? Okay? This is actually what's the Wasatch Socialist Party Workers Unite. And they're saying BYU students vote and overwhelmingly prefer Bernie! Exclamation point. What has happened? Because I guarantee you that most of these parents are probably, most of the parents that can send their kids to BYU are not socialists. So what's going on here? This is called the Heaven and Earth Conference. And we need to hustle through this. This is basically BYU. By the way, all this stuff is available on the DVD. It's called Book of Mormon, Current as the Daily News. Everything I've got to this point is that, but we're going to run out of time. So we got to hustle through. Oh man, we are going to run out of time. Okay. So the objectives of BYU evolution basically is to get the kids to believe it. The belief in literal Adam and Eve and so forth is higher than that. They go, what? Okay, so I gotta leave that one in there. This is at their conference, okay? This is Stephen Pack. Okay. I didn't notice the first time. It was pretty funny. Okay. Yeah. But so this is basically they're having this big evolution love fest, and I hate to put it this way, but I think I see the crack in their theory. But yeah, so actually about 2 weeks after this big event happened at UVU, it was actually sponsored by BYU, but they held it at UVU. I'm not sure why they didn't have it at BYU, but they didn't. Anyways, bottom line, so they interviewed the same guy, this Professor Peck at BYU, and from Newsweek, this is on the front page of Newsweek right here, is Evolution Real? Christians should embrace Darwin's theories, Mormon college professor says. BYU's gotten so good at converting our kids from their belief in creation and what the Lord said to evolution that 100% of the graduating class of the biology department at BYU in the last 3 or 4 years has been, they self-identify as evolutionists. The students graduating do.
How did they deal with 2222 in the Book of Mormon? 2222. Second Nephi 2:22. There was no procreation before Adam.
They have ways of looking at it, and believe me, yeah, they have ways of dealing with all this different stuff. And let me tell you though, so this spring they had a big conference lined up to have about 10 other universities that are Christian universities to come and have BYU teach them how they can get their kids to ignore creation and so forth from the Bible and believe in evolution and how they can kind of reconcile those two together. So now they're out there teaching other Christian denominations how they can get their kids to believe in apes and slime as our ancestors instead of Adam and Eve. So it's a really interesting aspect of it. We don't have time to jump in the middle of this real quick, but that's basically what he's talking about. Don't have time to go into that. Anybody been picking up on the fact that BYU has a statue on it of a known racist? They had a whole bunch of BYU students basically say, we can't be having a racist statue on our property. You know who the racist is? Brigham Young. Yeah. All right. You teachers, why are you ashamed to take upon you the name of Christ? I love that. President Nelson basically tells us to use the full proper name of the church. Because of the praise of the world. But we're not getting much praise of the world nowadays. We're not getting much love. This is ratings of religious groups vary more widely among older than younger Americans. So this is basically 65 years and older. These are what they call their warmth degree, or what they call it, the warmth factor or something like that. In other words, their positivity rating, basically, okay? So mainline Protestants rank the highest: Jews, Catholics, evangelical Christians, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindus, and down here at the bottom is Muslims and atheists in the 65-year-old and up group. But according to millennials, 18 to 29, Buddhism ranks highest. Catholics and Hindus are here. Jews, atheists, and evangelical Christians are here. Mainline Protestants, Muslims, and, oh yeah, coming up in last place is Mormons. So it's not working so well if you're trying to impress the rest of the world, because it's not happening. So the growth of the church falls to its lowest levels in 80 years. The growth of the church, this is, people talk about, sometimes I've had this thrown in my face, well, wait a minute, but, the Book of Mormon had to happen down in Central America because it's growing like crazy down there, right? I mean, there's so many baptisms and everybody's, in Guatemala and so forth. I mean, it's just, that's the Book of Mormon lands, right? So it should have all this growth of all these Lamanites down there joining the church. This, I don't know if you knew this or not, but this is in 2018. They 7 stakes and 53 wards and branches were discontinued in Mexico and Guatemala area. This is Mexico here. That's the list of the stakes that were discontinued. Mormon growth slow in the U.S. Mormon growth continues slow. This is actually the numbers, percentage growth, 2013, a paltry 2% growth. 1.9, 1.7, 1.5, 1.4. Every year it's less and less. Why is that? That's an important question. That's the biggest question the brethren have on their mind and on their hearts. Why is this happening? Now we're going to get into the last day stuff because that's going to answer to some extent what's going on here, okay? I'll just put it this way. Is this because we are not doing the missionary work effectively? Is it because we are not living the gospel fully? Possibly. Is it because the world is rejecting all things godly? I think it's the last thing. Mostly. I mean, I think all of it actually plays into it. But I think that the world is rejecting God. And no matter what our missionaries do, they're not going to be able to overcome it when everything around these people are coming from satanic sources, right? Okay, if this is from 2 Nephi, if it shall be because of iniquity, okay, it says, wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity, but if so, it'll be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes. Behold, I say unto you, as if you're, if you persist in your wickedness, that your days shall not be prolonged in the land. For the Lamanites shall be sent upon you, they shall come in a time when you know not, you shall be visited with utter destruction. It shall be according to the fierce anger of the Lord. Alma chapter 60. Behold, it is time, yea, the time is now at hand, brothers and sisters, that except we do bestir ourselves in the defense of our country and our little ones. Man, that hit me so hard. It's not just about our country, but also it's about our posterity. It's about our little ones. We have riots in the street going on if one person gets shot by a police officer and he's at the wrong color. But yet every day thousands of children are torn out from their mother's wombs, and we don't even bat an eyelash. We're not down there picketing and rioting in front of these places and demanding that all child's lives matter. Now, sword of justice doth hang over you, yea, and it shall fall upon you and visit you even to your utter destruction. That's what Alma said, okay? All right, so now this is interesting. It talks about the Gadianton robbers. The Lamanites actually fought off this band of robbers until they basically utterly destroyed them from among the Lamanites. So the Lamanites weren't having any of it. Said, you know what? You're going to do this stuff? We're taking you out. And they did. They took them out of the woodshed and whooped up on them, apparently, because they kicked them out. It came to pass, on the other hand, the Nephites did build them up and support them until they overspread all the land of the Nephites and seduced the more part of the righteous until they'd come down to believe in their works and partake in their spoils and join with them in their secret murders and combinations. And thus they did obtain the sole management of the government. They did trample under their feet and smite and rend and turn their backs upon the poor and the meek and the humble followers of God. So who did they turn their backs upon when they got control of the government? The poor and the meek and those who follow God. So who are these people today? They're trying to get power. We are seeing it in these poor cities. And I hate, and it's time, bottom line, I try not to be political because I'm an independent, basically, okay? Because I don't think either side is conservative enough for what I feel like, okay? But bottom line is that these Democrat-run cities that have been run by Democrats for years and years, the people are poor by far and away, and then you have people like I love that mayor of Chicago. She lets the poor places in her city just go to hell literally hell every night, gunshots and all kinds of stuff. Nobody dares to come out of their homes. But she wants to defund their police department so they have less police help and all this stuff. Oh, but not for her neighborhood. Oh, I have to have protection because I am. By the way, I'm the mayor.
And it's Trump.
The hypocrisy is absolutely just jaw-dropping. You just wonder, how can anybody? I almost wonder why people don't raise up and go to her home and drag her out in the street and give her a good horse whipping. Okay, but I don't know why. But anyway, whatever. Yeah, so. And thus we see that they were in an awful state and ripening for an everlasting destruction. You know, I'm not condoning, we don't want to have anybody doing that kind of stuff, but I'm just surprised that if people are willing to basically go down and breathe in, tear gas and so forth for their cause, I mean, whatever. But anyway, it's interesting. They were in an awful state and ripening for everlasting destruction. And this is interesting, there were many children who did grow up and began to wax strong in years, okay? And they became for themselves. What do you think that means? They became for themselves. They basically got old enough to be kind of on their own, right? Okay, so these are kind of adults, young adults, right? And were led away by some who were Zoramites, by their lyings and their flattering words, to join the Gadianton robbers. And thus were the Lamanites afflicted also and began to decrease as to their faith and their righteousness. Why? Because of the wickedness of the rising generation. We have the greatest generation of socialists coming out of our school systems that has ever been known in the promised land of America. And in fact, Robin Openshaw, she was talking just the other day at a rally thing, and she said her own kids basically are just hammering her, and so forth, about these things. Parents are being told by their kids, your ways are just wrong. We have to accept the socialist ideologies, and that's the best way to go, and that's the future of America. And they're telling their parents how it's going to be, and they really believe they've been told that they'll be able to overthrow us, right? The rest of us. Yeah, exactly what happened there. And then it said it defiance the laws and the rights of their country to covenant one with another, to destroy the governor. Does that sound familiar? And establish a king over the land, somebody who would basically rule without any opposition, right? That the land should no more be at liberty, but should be subject unto kings.
We're excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast, presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. This is a special 2-part release for Easter given to the Sisters of Liberty. Where are we in the Book of Mormon timeline? Part 2. Easter. I am he who liveth. I am he who is slain.
Now we're going to jump into the things that are happening, the signs and so forth. So one of the things that is interesting in the Book of Mormon, right before Christ comes, you have this massive event, right? It has this calamitous event. It basically talks about a terrible tempest and lightnings, and it shook the whole earth, and it sunk into the depths of the sea. Earth was carried up upon a city. The whole face of the land was changed, and highways were broken up. Cities were burned, and cities were covered with earth, and some sank into the earth, and others caused water to come up from the earth. Anyway, it was pretty horrendous, right? And we know, how many of you know about this New Madrid seismic zone? You know about that? Okay, in the heartland of America, underlying the Mississippi River, is a massive fault system that basically unleashed in 1811 and 1812. Unleashed with almost, in fact, here's a, let's see, where's my book about that? Right here. Okay, so this is just one, I have about a dozen books about this. This is called The Earthquake America Forgot, 2,000 Tumblers in 5 months, by Dr. Ray Knox and Dr. Ray Stewart, or David Stewart and Ray Knox. These guys have a combined about 60 years of experience themselves, and basically they go in, they talk about in 1811 and 1812 was a series of over 2,000 earthquakes. 3 of those were at 8.0 magnitude or bigger, even though there was no seismometers at the time. Just by the damage reports and so forth, they can actually figure out pretty close to how big it was. It actually rang church bells in South Carolina. It was felt clear up into New York and Pennsylvania. It knocked even the President of the United States had dishes and so forth that were knocked off the shelves from the biggest of these earthquakes. It was felt clear up into Canada and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. This was the epicenter. This is where the shaking was felt. Okay, this is a magnitude 6.8. This is from 1895. Okay, which is a little bit later. But in 1811, 1812, this fault let go with the biggest sequence of earthquakes that's ever been experienced that we know of by mankind. It's called New Madrid, was where the epicenters of these earthquakes were stemming from. This is actually the town of New Madrid. It actually had amazing things that happened. For example, it caused the Mississippi River, the ground itself got heaved up and actually stopped the Mississippi River. Mississippi River hit the impediment basically, and then went backwards, and the Mississippi River went upstream. A 30-foot tall wall of water just went flooding upstream and just destroying everything in its path. Eventually, the Mississippi River found a way around it and cut its way through that area again. But basically, this is Reelfoot Lake. This is a lake that was formed in just a few hours by the Mississippi River after it got dammed up. Okay, this is actually a picture of that. This is again more pictures of that. So you can see it's a big place. It caused interesting things like sand blows to happen. I actually have a presentation. It's in our DVD set. It's called the Book of Mormon Evidence Number 2. It's called The Destruction at the Time of Christ's Death. It's a 2-hour presentation on just this stuff. There's 28 observations made by the prophet Nephi in the Book of Mormon right before Christ came time frame. Okay. In the Book of Mormon, he gives 28 observations of what they saw and experienced when Christ was crucified, basically in the old world, right? I mean, it had all those things. Well, it turns out that out of those 28 things, if you could have like 20 out of 28 things actually verified, that would be really significant, wouldn't it? But what if I told you that we have actually 28 for 28? Every single thing that the prophet Nephi wrote in the Book of Mormon that they observed happening was in fact observed happening in this sequence of events, right down to the 3 days of darkness. Everything exactly as described by the Book of Mormon. And there's nobody who could have ever predicted that would be the case. Okay, these are sand blows. You'll notice these are barns, and that's a home right there. There's a little house right there. Okay, these are gigantic sand blows. Literally, the shaking was so violent that the ground settled down on the aquifers. The aquifers basically got super pressurized and caused holes to be shot up, and it blasted sand out. Sometimes it's 100 feet in the air. These are the entire region was actually covered in these sand blows. In fact, you can see it kind of flow down over through this area, and you can see these are farms basically out here, right? There's a whole. This is a whole subdivision. Look at all the sand blows that happened all over this whole area here, and they had to bring in sod basically to have a lawn here. You can see that out in the distance. You can see these massive sand blows. You can see the radial lines here from a huge sand blow that basically just flooded out into this whole region over here. That's by satellite. You see the size of that place? This is, by the way, this is the Hopewell Man site. This is where there's a Hopewell site there, which is a Book of Mormon site, basically here on the Ohio River as it comes up this way. This is Cape Girardeau. This is the Hopewell Man site right here. So it comes the Ohio River down to here. The Mississippi River is coming down to here. This happened basically right in this area around Cape Girardeau. And you can actually see that the color of the land itself is a grayish color because it's so much massive amounts of sand being blown up out of the ground in this whole region. Okay, and just going through that. By the way, that's Reelfoot Lake right there. That's the lake that formed in just a few hours when the Mississippi River got dammed up. It was originally going down through this way. It got dammed up, stopped down here, and then it made its way around over this way. No, basically that there was a similar event that happened in 1811, 1812 that we can use as an analysis point to see if it happened then, could it happen again? And the answer to that is absolutely. I've got there's a History Channel documentary. It's called Earthquake in the Heartland. I didn't bring any with them. They're hard to get now. They've been out for quite a while. But the bottom line is, if you get my DVD, it has all the right video clips from it. I'd love to play you some, but we just don't have time to play those. But basically, it's the largest sequence of earthquakes that ever happened in the lower 48 states that we know of. Even today, massive problems with it. This is the seismic zone. Basically, you can see it underlies the Mississippi River Valley. This is a lady by the name of Martisha Tuttle. She's a paleoseismologist with USGS. She has found direct evidence that there was a similar event as the one that happened in 1811 and 1812. Guess when?
March.
300 AD plus or minus 200 years. If you minus 200 years, that's 100 AD. When did the events of the Book of Mormon happen? 34 AD. So we're within 60 years. Clearly, that's within the limit of the dating here. Okay, we've actually now we believe we've been able to actually identify the actual event that was being observed by the prophet Nephi as he stood and saw these things happening. Right, and then a year later, they were all gathered at the temple, getting ready to offer sacrifices and so forth, and then they're all talking about all the changes that had happened. Remember all that? Okay. So that was an interesting point. So if you want to learn more about that, the book, many of you already have the green book. It's called Exploring the Book of Mormon, America's Heartland. You know what I'm talking about there? Can you hold that up for me? That one right there. That's in the back of the book, talking about this. Thank you. That's in the back of that. This is the page from that about the cause of the destruction, the time of Christ's death, and explaining all that. And basically, the New Matter historical event location. This is what some of that was. Okay. Now let's get into the time frame stuff. So we got blood moons. Everybody knows what a blood moon is, right? When it says the moon's going to turn to blood, it's not going to turn it into hemoglobin. Okay? Not going to happen that way. What it is going to do is going to look bloody because of the redness. Anybody know where the redness comes from? Why does it look red?
Is it from the sun?
Okay? It's not volcanic. It's actually pretty simple, but it's actually kind of cool. If you were basically, here's the sun, here's the earth, gets in the way and casts a shadow over the moon. From the moon's perspective, if you're standing here on the moon looking back towards the earth, basically the earth has a sunset every night, right? And where's that sunset point? Right where the light and the darkness meet, right? So you're going to have a sunset, and does it just happen just over here on our western horizon? No, what's going on around the entire circumference of the globe simultaneously, right? So if you're on the moon and you're looking at the earth, what you're seeing is a ring of sunset going on all through that. And when everything is sunset, what colors the sunsets?
They're red.
They're red. So what light color is going to be reflected from the sunsets all around the earth onto the dark moon? It's red. It's simply a factor of our atmosphere being red from the sunset, and it's reflecting onto the moon surface. Okay? All right. So 4 blood moons, blood moon tetrads. How many of you already know about the blood moon stuff? Okay, most of you know about it. Okay, I'm not going to spend any time on it then. You already know that some of this stuff happened in 2014, 2015. Very significant when you have a blood moon in the spring and also again in the fall at the equinox and at the solstice. Okay, when those two things, when those happen, it's kind of rare, but when it happens in succession, 4 times in succession, usually big things happen. Like, for example, let's see if I have it in here. I don't think I have it in here. But basically, like Israel became a state, you had the 6-day war, was preceded by one of these things. So there's interesting things that can happen to Israel after a lunar tetrad, and usually within just a couple of years. 4 blood moons, that's that John Hagee, you mentioned about that, I think, Colette, didn't you? Yeah. There's Glenn talking about that as well. This is one that actually my friend Keith Merrill, who did Legacy in the Testaments, he actually was involved with this one, called just blood moons. And so for this in Revelation, I beheld, we had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, interesting, an earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. An axe, and I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke, and the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and notable day of the Lord shall come. These are some of the things that actually happened in 1492, 1948, 1967. Okay? Spanish Inquisition was in 1492. The War of Independence was in 1948, and the 6-Day War was in 1967. So what will occur in the 2013 to 2015 time period? Well, we don't really know. Actually, we kind of do because we've gone past that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay? But it was a sign of something going to happen, right? Something big. So a solar eclipse is the opposite way. Basically, you have the moon now is in between the sun and the earth, and it casts a shadow on the earth. But because the earth is a lot bigger than the moon, basically it doesn't cover the entire earth's surface like the earth does when it gets in front of the moon. Okay, so what happens is basically we have this solar eclipse. This is one I actually took a picture of from Independence, Missouri, actually. But we all know about the August 21st, 2017 solar eclipse. It went from Salem, basically up here, basically crossed the path across the United States from sea to shining sea, across the middle section of the United States. This is kind of what it looks like from a darkness standpoint. This is where complete darkness would be right across this area. Then some percentage of darkness becoming less and less percentage until you get out to here. But you basically see this is going right across the United States. This is another image of it, but I want you to point out right here, this is St. Louis, there's Kansas City right here. Okay, this is blown up on Kansas City. It goes right over the top of an area. What is just north of Kansas City up there? Anybody been back east and seen the church history sites? You know what's up there? Adamandayaman's right there. So this goes directly over the top of Adamandayaman at that point in time. Now this is what it would have looked like basically from if you were standing on the moon looking back at the earth, with the sun behind you, basically, and there's the shadow of the moon comes right over the top of North America. When this happens, both promised lands are now in simultaneous darkness because Israel on the other side of the earth in at nighttime, and now the United States in the daytime is now like nighttime, right? And so this is what it kind of looks like with the moon's shadow basically over the earth. Now in 2024, and how many years apart are these? 7 years apart. So 2017, 7 years apart. Okay, 2024 is the next total eclipse of the United States, and interestingly, it goes the opposite direction. It basically goes in from Maine, it goes across New York, and all the way down here, and goes out through the bottom of Texas. Okay, how many of you already know about this too? Okay, but one thing I want to point out that you probably have never heard before, in fact, I would guarantee it pretty much. This is where it's going. So Buffalo, by the way, what's close to Buffalo, New York? Palmyra, we have Niagara Falls, but Palmyra and the First Vision, and then it goes right over Ohio, right over the top of where the first temple of this dispensation was built. Then it goes right over here, down to the bottom point of Illinois, and then off down through this area. This area right here is right where those earthquakes happen. The 1811, 1812 sequence of earthquakes, okay? Now, this is the total eclipses in 2017 and 2024. And interestingly enough, has everybody ever paid attention to where they cross right here? It's not Missouri. It's actually the southern tip of Illinois. You take Illinois right here, it's the southern tip, a little bit on the western side of the southern tip of Illinois. Now, this is coming down, again, there's Rochester, New York. That's where basically, the Hill Cumorah is at right here. Cleveland, Kirtland is just north of there, a little ways right here. So it's going right over the top of those. You'll have a beautiful view of this eclipse if you're standing on top of the Hill Cumorah when this happens. Yeah. It's going right through the middle of Bountiful. In fact, if our geography is right, basically it's going to go right over the top of Ohio down here. You see Ohio? There's Columbus, Ohio. Okay. Newark, Ohio is just to the north and just a little bit to the east of Columbus. And it's basically in that shadow. Why do I say Newark? Because Newark, Ohio is the greatest temple complex in the history of the earth. Is still there today. 4 square miles, and the entire plan of salvation is encoded in those ancient earthworks that date back 2,000 years. They have the entire plan of salvation. I don't know if we've probably never talked about that. There's just too much to talk about. Okay, but the bottom line is that everything from the pre-existence to the veil to the earth to a direct route to a vicarious route that leads to, these are all with sacred symbolism, with circles and squares and octagons, and this is 4 square miles in extent. There is no other religion on this planet that can even begin to explain this massive earthwork that's over, like I said, 4 square miles is how big it is, 2 miles square.
Is that the mound builders?
That's the mound builders, yes. And if we ever had an opportunity, in fact, if you watch some of the podcasts, we're going to cover all that stuff. It's just absolutely stunning, because every single part of the plan of salvation is in there in the right order. I mean, you know what the possibilities of that are for statistically speaking? I mean, it's like probably 1 in millions that somebody could just happen to do it, and they just happen to do it just right in the right order with a celestial, terrestrial, telestial kingdom. I mean, it's amazing. Okay, but that's coming down here. Okay, so we think that was probably the temple in Bountiful. And if it was the temple in Bountiful, then what happened there? Yeah. This is where the two of them actually meet. This little area right here. You see where Cape Girardeau here and Cannondale. Okay. This is the Mississippi River coming down here. The bottom of Illinois kind of looks like a bottom of a tooth. It has like 2 teeth right here. There's Paducah, Kentucky, and then it goes up on the Ohio River over here. So it basically creates this whole area is surrounded by these rivers that are basically a mile wide, each one of them. So this is a very big defensive thing. If you had rivers surrounding you, you wouldn't have to worry about being attacked, except for on one side right here. In the Book of Mormon, so there's Carbondale. If you take a close look, there's a okay, you can see that the city of Carbondale. You can't see it very well, but there's some water works over here. Oh, there it is. Okay, you see there's kind of a big lake right here, and the X happens just south of that lake. This is Carbondale up here. There's the lake right here, and so the X actually happens about right there, according to NASA. The closest city to that is this one down here. It's called Maconda, Illinois. We actually go to Maconda, Illinois on my tours. Has anybody here been on my tour? I have. Okay. Yeah. So we go to Maconda, Illinois. Why do we go there? Because this is the place where Laconius, just before Christ comes, the Gadianton robbers have gotten so bad and they've overrun so many people that they have to move out of their cities. They move out of Zarahemla. They move out of Bountiful. They basically say they join in the center of their lands with what? 7-year supply of food. That's right where I'm at. And then they go south, right? If Zarahemla is in Iowa, and if Ohio is where the land Bountiful is, then they would have been coming from Ohio and from Iowa into the center of their lands, which would have been Illinois. And it says they went south. If they went to southern Illinois, they have an amazing place where they could actually defend themselves better than any other place in the United States of America. They're surrounded on 3 sides by a river. All they have to do is defend one side. Interestingly enough, the ancient Hopewell mound builder culture that lived in this area back in the Book of Mormon time frames, they built 43 ancient fortifications all across the bottom of Illinois.
Aren't those the ones that Wayne May shows?
Yes. Yep, right here. The Shawnee National Forest, it comes right in here. This literally is right on the border of where those fortifications are located. Okay? In fact, this is in our book, the Annotated Book of Mormon. If you have that, it actually shows you here. These are the fortifications along the bottom of Illinois, right here. Interestingly enough, this is where the X happens. Isn't that fascinating? Now we're going to get into the timing of this whole thing. So this is what it kind of looks like. These are the bluffs. There's a bluff that goes all the way along the whole bottom of that, and that's where they built their fortifications, on the top of these bluffs. So this is Pounds Hollow area here. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that's pretty awesome stuff. These are some of the rock walls that still exist there, that still are there. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, before I jump out of this, though, real quick, this is the place then, if our geography is correct in the Book of Mormon, this is the place where Laconius gathers all of the righteous Nephites out of their lands to bring them all together, because the Gadianton robbers have so thoroughly overrun their lands that they can no longer live in their cities. They have to get out, and they have to have 7-year supply of food. Why? Because they have to basically outlive the Gadianton robbers. Because the Gadianton robbers, they don't produce anything, just like the mob, right? Just like they don't produce anything. They basically just take, right? Well, eventually you run out of other people's stuff, you know, and so that's what happened to the Gadianton robbers. They couldn't steal from the Nephites anymore because they were in these protected areas, and so they finally just had to leave. They were starving to death because they'd eaten all the game around there. Isn't it interesting that the place where the second crossing solar eclipse happens actually pinpoints the place on the map where the Nephites gathered their people for their final stand? for 7 years of plenty they had had, and now they were about to plunge into the 7 years of famine. If that is a type and shadow, then maybe the second eclipse will be the sign of the end of the 7 years of plenty. And if you don't have yourself prepared by that point in time, it's too late. The people are gathering, and you cannot continue to get food at that point in time. You'll be dying. I think we've had 7 years of plenty. From the first eclipse until now, we're doing all pretty good, right? This next eclipse is 4 years from now. Do we still have 4 more years to prepare? And my feeling is yes, we do. Now, I'm not a prophet here, okay? If a prophet says something different, go with him, okay? This is speculation, but it's based on some pretty solid things. In fact, what I wanted to tell you was all these books I have sitting up here, these are just some of the books that go to bear on this research that I'm about to share with you, the timeline stuff. Okay, so we need to get through this really quickly, but bottom line is that this isn't just, I've talked to Jody Stoddard. She's really a sweet gal. I think that there's a couple things that are missing in her timelines. I think it's a little too close, but that's my opinion versus her opinion, and so forth. I think she does a big service though for people to kind of at least look into this stuff, right? Because we're told a lot of times to say, well, you shouldn't really look for the mysteries and so forth. Well, that's baloney. We're actually commanded to study the mysteries. And you are the Sisters of Liberty. You know that probably better than most people do for sure. What's that? Yeah, it's back to, well, I'd say, so now interestingly enough, this right here, this is that New Madrid area. But these are just the earthquakes that have happened in the past 6 months. This area is still very active. They say on average, the New Madrid has a tendency to have a big one about every 200 years. And they can actually show that in the archaeological record, in the geological record. They can actually see, because when this happens, they have these huge sand blows. It really jumbles things up really bad. About every 200 years, there's another one of these big ones that come out on an average. The last one was in 1811 and 1812. So let's see. Oh, yeah. And not only that, but brothers and sisters, get this though for a second. The New Madrid seismic zone seems to have a weird tendency to be a precursor to Christ coming to our country. It went off big time right before Christ came to the Nephites. It went off big time right before Christ came to a young prophet by the name of Joseph Smith in a sacred grove in 1820. Could it be that it may also be a precursor to Christ's return again to America? And if it did, I can guarantee you that it will bring America to its knees in a millisecond. Because all of the major arteries that go up from gas lines and natural gas and so forth, all of those run right up through this area. A major earthquake would cause massive destruction. Most of the bridges crossing the Mississippi and Ohio rivers are not hardened to more than about a 4 or 5 earthquake. These had magnitude 7s and 8s. There's only about 3 bridges, and they've actually been desperately trying to rebuild many of the bridges that could actually take a 7 to 8 magnitude earthquake, because they know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And if that does happen, it's going to be pretty devastating. This is the Palestine Post. The state of Israel is born. This is, by the way, Jerusalem. This is on May of 1948, when Jerusalem became a state. U.S. opens the embassy in Jerusalem, recognizing the city as the true capital of Israel. And when did that happen? May 2018. How many years is that apart? 70 years. 70 years, almost to the day of when that happened, right? A true capital. President Trump announces U.S. will recognize Israel as the capital. Why is that significant? Because where is the temple going to be built? Yeah. Well, the temple in Jerusalem. So this is actually the coin here. So you can take a look at it. But this is the temple coin. When you buy this temple coin, the money goes to basically help to prepare the Jews to build their temple. So if you want to, I'm going to pass that around, but it's pretty cool. But it has Trump on it.
And Cyrus.
And Cyrus on the coin. Yeah. Now these are some of the resources that I have personally used in my studies, and this has been many years ago. Anybody ever heard of Manuel Velikovsky? Okay, awesome guy. He wrote a couple of books. One's called Earth in Upheaval. Another one's called Worlds in Collision. That's the one I read there. And then Ages in Chaos. But this guy was a Russian-born Jew, and he basically turned into a Christian. And he was fighting off guys like Carl Sagan, who was the great atheist. Okay. And he made all kinds of predictions based on what he was seeing in nature and things that were going on around the world that actually helps to explain a lot of things that happened, like around the time of the Exodus and so forth. Anyway, so he made all kinds of predictions about what science would find in different fields, and virtually all of the things that he was saying they would find have been actually verified. In fact, that's all in this book called Velikovsky Reconsidered. He was attacked mercilessly by the scientific establishment and Carl Sagan, basically tried to get him from being published and everything else. But these books have some awesome stuff in them. This guy's Anthony Larson. He took Velikovsky's books, and he's an LDS guy in California, and he wrote a couple of books called And the Moon Shall Turn to Blood by Anthony Larson, and The Earth Shall Rule To and Fro, Volume 2, and Volume 3 is And There Shall Be a New Heaven and a New Earth. And by using Velikovsky's information and his ideas, he came up with some other ideas and so on. This has been years and years since I read these books, but they're pretty eye-opening about that, okay? And then, how many of you have heard of Ezra's Eagle? Okay, how many of you have not heard of Ezra's Eagle? Okay, just a couple of that, basically. There's a prophecy by Ezra. Ezra was a prophet, basically, that was originally in the Bible. They took him out because they couldn't verify some of the stuff. They didn't have enough verification, I guess, for the Catholic Church. They took him out. But it has some really interesting stuff in it. And Ezra's Eagle's prophecy talks about this eagle. It has 3 heads and 2 wings. The wings basically have these feathers, and they go through and talks about the length of each one of these feathers. And just to make it really short, basically, amazingly enough, they talk about this wing being involved with the last days government, the government of the promised land of the last days, and that these would be the leaders of that government. And so, for example, we have a really super long wing that actually goes out to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. How many terms did he serve?
3, almost 4.
I think it was 4, wasn't it? Yeah. So he served the longest time, so his feather's the longest one. Interesting, this is a couple of checks and balances. Number 5 here, that was John F. Kennedy. Of course, he was assassinated, right? And then number 7 here is Richard Nixon, and he actually resigned. Or get impeached. He was about to be it, so he resigned before he could impeach him. So anyway. And then all the other ones are pretty much the same, pretty similar right here. All the way up to President Barack Obama, okay? But on the other side of the eagle, then, are several short feathers, 4 short feathers, and 2 of them, they're not even connected. If the prophecies are holding, basically, then the short feather here, number 1, would be President Donald Trump. But his feather is a short feather, which means that his presidency would be cut short somehow. I think that's what the speculation is, basically, about that. That his would be, now, obviously, he served out pretty much almost his full first term. Maybe it's the second term, or maybe he gets killed, because the other people didn't lose necessarily; they just lost the election, right? But their feathers are normal size. This is when their presidency is somehow cut short. Okay, at least that's as I understand it. Okay, so what's that? This one here? Yeah. Okay, it's actually in the book and so forth. You can actually get this online right here. Okay. But basically, so that then Mike Pence would then take over for President Trump. Interestingly enough, each feather gets progressively shorter and shorter. Not a lot shorter, but enough that you can actually tell that they're a little bit shorter. And amazingly enough, in the Book of Mormon, as if you take the time frame right before Christ comes, if you take a look at their political leaders, and you go back about 6 leaders, okay, each one of them has their presidency cut short, assassinated. Their brother kills them, and so forth. And each one is just progressively just a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter, right up until Christ comes. Okay? So we're probably looking at severe instability when you basically realize that the leader of a nation, we've never had really a leader get shot until, except for John Kennedy, for a long, long time. Most of us have not been alive long enough to have had that happen. bottom line, it appears as if it's possible that President Trump would be basically killed. It has to do with the three heads in the middle. Basically, the three heads in the middle are the actual governing structure, and basically, that's one of the things about President Trump. If you take a look at the main thing here, all of these are full on the wing here. This is kind of an injured wing, because from Trump on out this way, they're not really believing in these heads. In other words, they're not part of the deal. They're outsiders, which makes this wing not as strong as the other side with all the people who were insiders, or at least some of them were, okay? Again, we don't have time to get into details. I'm just saying that my personal feeling is, brothers and sisters, if you have an opportunity to pray, which you do morning, noon, and night, you need to be praying for our country. And I personally pray for Donald Trump. I personally also pray for Glenn Beck, because I know that he has life threats on him almost continuously. He's got a pretty good entourage of people around him that keeps him safe. But there's a lot of people who hate these people. And so, anybody know where this is? This is Bosnia. You ever seen Bosnia before? This is Bosnia before the Bosnian War, okay? This is a little bit what it looked like afterwards. This is what happens when you go against superpowers and basically, and nobody really focuses on what's going on here. The reason why I bring this up is because another thing that I'm going to bring into the last part of our discussion here, which is the actual signs that are going into all this stuff, right? I want you to know that it's more than just the scriptures, although the scriptures have to take precedence. Basically, it has to be scriptural, it doesn't work, right? Okay, but there's a lot of other things that play into this whole thing. So things like, for example, there's a guy who lived through this Kosovo experience, and he wrote all about it in French, actually. But he has some amazing insights into the things that we can do to prepare our families for the things that are coming. One of the things that I feel so strongly that we need to prepare for is to be able to handle what's coming up emotionally. Because we are a nation who, most of our kids have never even seen a chicken killed. Death is not something that we're used to seeing. And destruction is not something that we're used to either. And when death and destruction comes to your backyard, some people, they just can't deal with it. They just lock up and they're going to die. So my hope is to not to scare the bejeebers out of you, but to help you mentally kind of start to begin to prepare for being able to deal with the things that may be coming down the pike. Because the things that have been told are not very pleasant, as you know. Okay, but we don't have to fear if we're prepared. So how do you prepare for everything? I mean, what are the things we need to prepare for? A nuclear attack, a biological attack, an invasion, an EMP, And I finally realized there's no way. There's no way you can prepare for every possible scenario. And besides that, I kind of have to say, why would you want to? I mean, death is not the worst thing. Okay? Okay? In fact, if you want to get an idea of maybe almost worse than death, but basically, look at this. This are some of the people from Bosnia when they finally liberated the city. And there's a whole bunch of pictures on the internet that shows these townspeople when they finally were able to come out of their homes after about 4 years of being under siege. If the Book of Mormon is correct, then there's going to be a siege against the good people, right? The Nephites had to go in the center of their lands with 7-year supply of food, because who was going to siege upon them? The Gadianton robbers. If the Gadianton robbers have taken over our government, if they've taken over our country, and we're having to basically band together to survive, then how many years of food do you think you ought to have? A 48-hour kit? Scripturally speaking, there's only been one time frame of food to have, and that's 7 years. It was 7 years for the Israelites in Egypt, Basically when Pharaoh and all that stuff. There was 7 years for the Nephites. That's the only 2 times when food storage has actually saved the overall population. It wasn't a 2-year supply, folks. Sorry, but it wasn't. Okay? Not saying that everybody has to go run out and get a 7-year supply, but it might not be a bad idea. It is scriptural. Okay, so, all right, so you don't want to look like this guy. He apparently didn't have a full 7-year supply of food. This one is one that I also gained a lot of insights from that we're going to talk about here in just another second here. It's called After Armageddon. Anybody seen this or heard of it? No. Okay, a couple of you have heard of it. I got to tell you, I hesitate to tell people about this because it's depressing. Okay, let's just say it how it is. It's just dang depressing. Basically, it's a family. It's a story of a family living in L.A., and at the beginning of the show, it's a documentary, kind of a docudrama. It's got some documentary aspects, and then it kind of goes to some experts, and they talk about stuff, and then it shows them kind of playing it out. But basically it has this Chinese guy. He's getting on a plane. He's coughing his brains out. He gets on this plane, and he lands in L.A. And all of a sudden, L.A. is in the middle of a pandemic that's killing people. I mean, way worse than this COVID stuff is. COVID is not even as bad as the flu, really. In fact, did you see the CDC numbers a couple of days ago? Was it 94% of everybody who has died had pre-existing conditions? Yeah. Only 6% of the people who have died as a direct result of the COVID-19. But yet we're all going to be muzzled and masked and shut down our businesses and shut down our entire economy and destroy everything that many people have spent their entire lifetimes doing over something that's not even half as bad as the cold. And yet we have even knuckleheads in our state here, shutting things down and so forth. At least we have some, a governor saying, well, I'll let the lower people decide. But the lower people are basically deciding against what a lot of, I don't know, it's crazy. It's because of the false information coming from our news. But bottom line, this is an awesome show to help you mentally engage with the things that they've had to deal with. It's called After Armageddon. So so this family, he basically, just in a nutshell, he's a nurse. This is his son and his wife. Basically, they live in the suburb of L.A., and then because of the pandemic happening, he's called by some of his colleagues and says, "Don't come into the hospital, dude. If you do, it's a death sentence. Do not come into the hospital." And people start dying all over, and they can't keep up to it and so forth. Then pretty soon, most of his neighbors are heading out of town to go to Idaho and Utah and other places, and so they're kind of stuck there as well. I might have to still go back into work. He's thinking that he's going to have to go into work, right? And then it doesn't get too far along before basically the highways are shut down because the gas stations and so forth are being shut down. There's no food. He goes out to go find some food for them one night, and he comes back. He says, "Oh my gosh, they've broken into the store. There's nothing left. It's empty." And he's like, well, we do have some top ramen and some other stuff here, So they're like eating that, and then pretty soon their water goes off. Said, "Oh, well, now what?" They're already having to bury their poop in the backyard because there's no water basically happening. And then they're still hunkering down, thinking, okay, this is going to be better. And of course, on the radio, they're saying they're getting updates every day, saying, this part and this part, we're trying to get power back on or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the power goes out to them, and they spend their first couple of nights with no power, and the stuff in their fridge is now starting to stink. And they're like, well, what are we going to do? And then pretty soon, there's roving gangs going through their neighborhood, and the dad actually says, oh my gosh. Grab a bunch of your stuff and throw it out on the front lawn. He's going, what? We're not going to throw our stuff on the front lawn. He said, do it right now. You get the stuff out and throw it on the front lawn. Because there's roving gangs. He said, we got to make our house look like it's already been looted, or they're going to come into our house and find us in here. So just things like that you don't even think about. Just really kind of cool to actually think, wow, that was pretty smart. But anyway, but they end up finding a way to get out of town. They get out. They said, okay, if we can just find a small little farm town, we're all healthy. We can work. We can just help them out, whatever. And they finally get out to this point, and they come around a bend, and there's a roadblock, and the townspeople basically are out there with their guns and are saying, where are you going? Well, we need some food. My wife and my son are starving here. Can you just help us out with something? He said, you know what? You just better turn around and head back to where you came from, because you're not welcome here. So he's like, okay, so now what? Anyway, so bottom line is that he goes, kind of shows kind of the humanity of the situation too, because as they leave to go back, there's a guy on the side of the road, he's been beat up and so forth, and they stop and they have only 3 bottles of water left for the 3 of them. And he basically says, you know what, I'm a nurse. If I had some stuff, I could probably help you, but I've got nothing. All I can offer you is water. And his wife is going, why are you offering our last water bottle? Kind of thing. And he said, well, you know what? We're all going to die anyway. I'm just going to help this guy. So he goes back, gives the guy a drink of water. They spend the night in the desert, basically. He kills a snake, and the son won't eat it. I'm not eating no stinking snake. Yes, you will eat this snake. Kind of thing, you know. They get into altercation because it's, you know, just the stress levels are just off the charts. And then long story short is basically the next morning they get up and some other cars come, another truck comes down and they stop and they hide behind a berm because they see people in the back with guns, and they get out and they punch a hole in the car that they had just a little bit of gas left in it. They punch a hole in the gas tank and empty all the gas out because gas is now king. Because nobody's making gas, so if you have gas, that's huge, right? So they empty their tank out, so now they're really stuck. And they're walking along, they're just thinking, you know what, we're just going to die. And all of a sudden this truck comes flying up past them and stops. And it's the guy he gave the water to the day before. He says, I live in that town. I went out to go do something and I got jumped and beat up. He says, I'm heading back into that town because you saved my life. He said, you jump in this truck with me and I'll get you back into town. And so they did. They went in, they let him in, and now they're living in this little farming community. It's really just awesome. So it's called After Armageddon. This is what it showed, like on the freeway, basically. You know, when they were trying to get out of town, they couldn't get off in the freeways. They found an aqueduct, basically, and they followed an aqueduct up out of L.A. area. Pretty cool. Dreams and Visions, The Last Days, Roger Young. It's another one, Visions of Glory. Some of you may have heard of him, right? Okay. Tom is a personal friend of mine and has some awesome stuff. He actually talks about the New Madrid earthquake that he saw. Oh, yeah? Okay, so I'm telling you, the New Madrid is going to be a part of this. It's going to play a part of what we're going to see in the future, okay? I don't know if you've seen this or not. Have you ever heard of this? It's called drone weaponry. Anybody heard of that? Drones? I mentioned those other things before about nuclear and biological and all this kind of stuff. But I really think that this is probably the most likely scenario that we might see as we plunge deeper and deeper into anarchy and chaos in our nation. I think if the Democrats win the election, we're going to be plunged into chaos. If Donald Trump wins the election, we're going to be plunged into chaos. Because on one hand, they're not going to accept that Donald Trump would win. If he did win, they're not going to accept that, and they're going to continue with the riots. If Joe Biden wins, then the rioters will basically have carte blanche to do whatever they want to because they know that they're not going to be attacked for it. So either way, I think it's going to get worse. Okay? I think, though, that citizens of the United States are, in fact, rising up. If you saw that what happened in Portland the other day, you know, 600 cars and trucks basically with flags and everything went down through the middle of Portland. And then, of course, they responded with killing one of the supporters of that organization. It is getting to be like a civil war. In the Book of Mormon, if we think that we're going to avoid a civil war, then we don't know the Book of Mormon. Because that's all about, especially that end part. If we're not willing to stand for our freedoms, then they will be taken away. Yeah. And Moroni, basically, the time for being, you know, not engaged and so forth, is quickly coming to an end. You're going to have to make a choice which side you're going to be on. If you're going to be on one of the sides, those sides are going to need to have help. I mean, they are divided our country to the point where we're divided in every kind of which way, from male versus female to gay versus straight to black versus white to, you know, all these different possible ways. Yeah. I probably should play this one because this one is it's kind of intense, but it's a pretty interesting deal. It's a video. You can actually. Hopefully the audio's on.
Precision strikes last year. We're super proud of it. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger. Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite.
turn
Hell
it?
of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents. They used to say guns don't kill people. People do. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now, trust me, these were all bad guys. Now that is an airstrike of surgical precision. It's one of a range of products. Trained as a team, they can penetrate buildings, cars, trains, evade people, bullets, pretty much any countermeasure. They cannot be stopped. Now, I said this was big. Why? Because we are thinking big. Watch. $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available today. We have a distribution network taking orders from military, law enforcement, and specialist clients.
The nation is still recovering from yesterday's incident, which officials are describing as some kind of automated attack, which killed 11 U.S. senators at the Capitol building.
They flew in from everywhere but attacked just one side of the aisle. It was chaos. People were screaming.
You can see high windows, very small, precisely punctured to gain entry to the building.
What did you do for the victim?
I just did what I could for him. Things weren't even interested in me. They're just buzzing.
Government sources admit the intelligence community has no idea who perpetrated the attack, nor whether it was a state, group, or even a single individual.
So if we can't defend ourselves, then we strike back.
We are investing very heavily in classified defense projects.
We make it our deterrent like our nuclear deterrent. We stockpile in the millions, the billions.
At key facilities, the White House, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street.
Safe in their homes.
Well, we wish we had boots on the ground in every community in this country, but we don't. So our instructions
Ollie?
and our suggestions are to stay in touch with you.
Ollie, hi. Hi, Ollie, honey. How's Edinburgh today? How are all your studies going, huh?
Good. Great.
Oh, great. Hey, aren't we doing a video call today?
I'm kind of with people, so.
Oh, well, come on, Oliver, put her on.
Oh no, it's not like that. Wait.
Oh, well, listen, I see some photos here with somebody, and I can see lots of likes, and what's that all about? Oh, wait a minute, here, and on your
mom. She's on the spy stuff in the military.
What? What is this video right here? Oh. No, I'm not going to click on that.
Oh, it's just this human rights thing about oppression or whatever.
Honey, you're not going into politics, are you? I mean, no protest march.
Safe here, just like you said it would be.
Heavy traffic approaching the A720 this morning due to police.
Police are not saying this morning what prompted the alert.
Claim relaxing firearm legislation would be useless against the so-called slaughter bots.
Is to stay away from crowds. When indoors, keep windows covered with shutters.
Protect your family. Stay inside.
Oliver, can you hear me? Listen to me.
I can hear it. I can hear it, Mom.
It's close.
Authorities are still struggling to make sense of an attack on university campuses worldwide, which targeted some students and not others. The search for a motive is apparently turning to social media, and a video shared by the victims exposing corruption at the high.
It's far from surprising. The weapons took away the expense, danger, and risk of waging war. And now we can't afford to challenge anyone, really. It's not even the smallest fringe group or a crank.
Who could have done this?
Anyone.
Dumb weapons drop where you point them. Smart weapons consume data. When you can find your enemy using data, even by a hashtag, you can target an evil ideology right where it starts.
Yikes.
It was the results of integrating and miniaturizing technologies that we already have. I'm Stuart Russell, a professor of computer science at Berkeley. I've worked in AI for more than 35 years. Its potential to benefit humanity is enormous, even in defense. But allowing machines to choose to kill humans will be devastating to our security and freedom. Thousands of my fellow researchers agree. We have an opportunity to prevent the future you just saw, but the window to act is closing fast.
Whoa. That's a little bit hard to stomach, isn't it? Holy smokes. Okay, so basically the point here is that there are technologies that we don't even realize that are out there. They're not talking about it, but they're definitely there. As far as some of these kind of things, the point basically is that so now that everybody is like, oh my gosh, this is the little picture there. Let's just talk about a few of the other signs that we have seen recently, and then we're going to be done. Okay, so did you feel the earthquakes this morning? It was the announcement there in Salt Lake, with a 5.7 magnitude rock Salt Lake City, right? Basically in this general area right here. Okay, and within about an hour of the earthquake, I had people sending me pictures of the top of the temple. I was like, whoa, that's weird. That's amazing. Where's the horn? And it turned out that the horn was actually sitting down here in the little crotch of that thing there. But so that led me to instantly I was thinking, okay, so what kind of a sign could this be? Is this a sign of some sort? Because that's just really bizarre, right? So, well, first off, we understand. So I called Amberly, and I called up the Pickerings and some other people who are kind of symbology experts. I said, okay, so what do you think? I said, well, what do you think? I said, well, I think it's a pretty big deal. Okay, and Amberly Nelson said, I think it's one of the biggest, probably, she didn't say the biggest, she said, I think it's one of the scariest signs I've ever seen in my life so far. And I said, okay. She said, well, what do you think? I said, well, basically, why is there a Mormon on the top of the temple in the first place? It's because Joseph Smith saw in vision the first two temples of this dispensation, the Kirtland and Nauvoo temple, and both of them had a Moroni flying through the midst of heaven, blowing a horn, indicating what? That the gospel is going to go out to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. So the Book of Mormon was going to go out, right? So that was the sign, basically, that they were doing here. And of course, you can see it here on the Kirtland Temple, and then also this is on our book here. This is the actual one that they use there, Nauvoo Metal Angel. Okay, and it's also on the top of the Nauvoo. Was on the top of the Nauvoo Temple originally. Now they have the standard one, like the one you see there. This is the one there. Okay, and interestingly enough, so I was thinking about that and was going, of all the temples, I mean, the Ochre Mountain Temple was a lot closer to the epicenter of the earthquake than the Salt Lake Temple was, and the South Jordan Temple is not that much further away. The Draper Temple is right there too, but the only temple that sustained any damage was the Salt Lake Temple, and the only real damage that it was sustained was Moroni dropped the horn. I mean, there's something really about that. I realized, this is powerful, because this is not just any temple, right? This is the iconic structure of the church. This is the place where the Holy of Holies is located. This is where the brethren meet every week, right? So this is a big, big deal. And so I thought, then I talked to Amber. She says, well, the thing about the horn is important too. I said, well, okay, tell me more. She says, well, you have the Feast of Trumpets. What is the Feast of Trumpets? It's in the fall of the year. After they have their harvest, after they have their crops have grown, and they harvest all of their stuff, and they bring in the final harvest. Then they have a big feast, and at the end of the feast, they basically have, everybody gets up and they basically blow their shofars. They do a big shofar blow. Now that's interesting. They do several staccato notes on the shofar. They go do 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 kind of thing, and then they take as big and deep a breath as they can, and it wah, it's as loud and as long as they can possibly hold it until they just and they're spent, right? But when that horn stops, that's the beginning, basically. They got 10 days till Yom Kippur, which is the judgment. So you have 10 days to get yourself right before God, or else the judgment's going to happen, okay? So this is from Joel 1. It says, I love this. It says, sanctify ye a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders of all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord. Alas, for the day of the Lord is at hand, and destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Interestingly, in the Book of Mormon, or it actually tells us in our scriptures that it says, upon my house shall it begin, and from my house shall it go forth, right? What is it that they're talking about? They're talking about a cleansing that's going to happen, right? This is, blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, a solemn assembly, gather the people, and so forth. Let the priests, ministers weep. So enough about that. Verily I say unto you, darkness covereth the earth, gross darkness the minds of the people, and all flesh has become corrupt before my face. And upon my house shall it begin, and from my house shall it go forth, saith the Lord. It's in section 112. This is the coming of the Lord. This is Wilford Woodruff. He talked about this as well. He says, when the missionaries lay up your wheat and other provisions against the day of need, for the day will come when they will be wanted, and no mistake about it. Thing to feed them and ourselves when famine comes. So he says, the missionaries of the church will be called home, and the Lord will preach his own sermons to the people. Our elders from far and near will be called home. Come home, I will now preach my own sermons as a preface to the sermon that will be preached with fire and sword, tempest, earthquake, and rain, thunder, and lightnings, and fearful destruction. So as I started getting this information and so forth from Amberly and others, I realized that could it be that this was actually a sign that if the trumpet was the sign that the gospel was going out to all the nations of the earth, then could it be that the dropping of the trumpet would be the cessation of that? And so that happened, the earthquake happened on a Wednesday. Wednesday afternoon, I wrote an article, had Ryan, my personal assistant, he put it up on Thursday morning. And in the article, I said, it looks to me like this is a sign that the mandate to take the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people is basically at an end. Now, I had a little bit of background information on that. As I understand it from a good friend of mine, and he actually verified it, but I believe it was Elder Ballard had gone back to California in like November or October sometime last year to a single adult conference. And as he spoke, he basically said that the church has fulfilled its mandate to take the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. I was thinking, well, how could that possibly be? I mean, we're not in India, really. We're not really in China. I mean, we've got lots of places we still need to get to. And so I said, well, you got to ask him. So he actually went. He has a monthly meeting with them, and so he basically came back the next time he had a meeting. He said, I did verify it. Yes, he did say that, and yes, that's what he meant. The church has fulfilled its mandate. And basically, I guess when he questioned him, he kind of the indication was that he said whose church is it anyway? If the Lord says that you've accomplished it, then you've accomplished it. Now, I don't know what all that means from that, but I know that, and we're going to get into this a little bit more here too. There's a lot. What time is it anyway? About 1?
10 to 1.
Okay, sheesh, this is going long. Okay, but basically, so we're going to be, there's going to be a time when we're going to have a big infusion of other missionaries. That comes into this timeline in just a second here. So who's going to be this other infusion? We're going to have 144,000 missionaries. Right? We're going to get into that in just 1 second. But bottom line is I've often thought, is the church failing in its responsibility to take the gospel to the world? Because, I mean, the numbers are going down and so forth. Our growth is slowing and slowing and slowing. And I finally came to the conclusion that actually that's not the case. The world is rejecting God. It's not the church's problem, it's the world's problem. And if that's the case, then basically God's going to call his missionaries home. And when he does, then he said basically that's what these are talking about here, missionaries called home. When the missionaries are called home, then he says, I will preach my sermons to the world through all kinds of problems, right? And let's see. This is Journal of Discourses. Don't have time to go into that. Basically trying to make this faster. I will give you a new commission. You should go to the scattered remnants of the house of Israel, gather them from the 4 quarters of the earth and bring them again into their own lands. The 4 quarters of the earth is interesting. Sometimes it talks about the 4 corners of the earth, which is symbolically talking about the earth. It's represented by a square or a rectangle. But when it talks about the 4 quarters of the earth, what is that talking about? Oh, this is okay. So those of you who are at the last one with the universal model stuff, the universal model is really the only way that you can explain some of this 4 quarters of the earth thing. But we'll just get there in just 1 second. Okay, so now we've had 728 earthquakes along the Wasatch Front in the 2 weeks since the Magna earthquake. This is COVID-19, Australian wildfires, locusts, pandemic, all this kind of stuff. I don't know that these are the actual ones that are being talked about, but they're certainly happening, right? In 3 short months, just like he did with the plagues of Egypt, God has taken everything we worship. God said, you want to worship athletes? I'll shut down the stadiums. You want to worship musicians? Shut down the civic centers. You want to worship actors? I'll shut down the theaters. You want to worship money? Shut down the economy and collapse the stock market. My people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. And of course, you know where that comes from. Maybe we don't need a vaccine. Maybe we need to take this time of isolation from the distraction of the world and have a personal revival where we focus on the only thing in the world that really matters. And that's Christ. Pretty awesome. My daughter Shauna, when we had the morning session, will include Worldwide Solemn Assembly with the Hosanna Shout. How many of you participated in that? Isn't it interesting? Have any of you ever been involved with the Hosanna Shout that wasn't part of a temple dedication? Where did the original Hosanna Shout come from? From Palm Sunday, right? They get a Hosanna Shout because they were welcoming Christ into Jerusalem, right? When we do the Hosanna Shout, we're welcoming Christ into our temples that just was recently, had just been built. Did you ever think about the fact, where were you when we did the Hosanna Shout this time? Were you at a stake center? At a church building? At a conference center? We were in our homes. And what are we doing when we're doing the Hosanna Shout?
We're welcoming in the Savior.
We're welcoming Christ into our temples, into our homes, and into our hearts and into our lives. That wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have been on a COVID lockdown, right? We'd have been all over our churches and all over the conference building and so forth. But instead, we were all in our homes. I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's exactly how it's supposed to happen. My daughter Shauna shared this good insight. She said, I felt strongly that the Hosanna Shout at the end of this conference is as important and symbolic as it was as we do for a temple dedication. Only this time, instead of a physical building, we are dedicating ourselves, our physical tabernacles, as temples, as the pioneers. 2 weeks ago, Moroni's trumpet fell. Last week was our worldwide fast, and tomorrow is our solemn assembly. That was one of the tweets I got. And now we're finally into the final day time frame here. Okay. This, by the way, is from the Pickerings, Rhonda and Farrell Pickering. If you already know about some of their stuff, I just want to share with you the reason why I picked their stuff is because with all of my research, this actually kind of matches the closest to what I feel like may be a possible scenario. We're not trying to say that this is the scenario, but there's scripturally some pretty good backing for this. And I think you'll see some pretty good logic too, but there's also going to be signs along the way that are going to be like sign markers, and you'll be able to know if this is actually accurate or not. So you don't have to really just take it all in one lump right now. So you probably can't see a lot of that, so I made it a little bit bigger so you can see this left-hand side of it. You have the blood moons going on over here. We specifically did not put any dates on this because we're not trying to identify a date. We're actually just trying to identify how these different time periods relate with one another in the whole sequence. You have to understand that there's an overall sequence, and that is basically there has to be 3 cleansing, 3 woes are talked about, right? What are the 3 cleansings? The first that has to be cleansed is what? We just talked about it. From my house. So what's going to be cleansed first? The church. Okay. What's the second thing going to be cleansed? The Gentile nations. What's the third thing that's going to be cleansed? It's the Jews. Okay. Those are the 3 primary cleansings, as I understand them, that we're going to be going through and that we're going to need to look at. So basically, if we have the blood moons, that's basically heralding that something big is coming up, right? Then we have, they have another complete solar eclipse, basically, that was in 2017. They have the blood moon over Jerusalem on July of 2018. And then you basically have 7 years going on before you have the second eclipse happening, the one in 2024. So these are year figures here, basically, right? Okay? So there's going to be signs in the heavens that are happening as well. And the Pickerings can talk to you more about that. But let me just kind of go quickly over this. So this is where the first year basically starts here. We think this could be when the second eclipse happens, the 2024 eclipse, that would begin. So we've had 7 years from 2017 to 2024, that's 7 years. That's 7 years of plenty. We can still get food, we can still buy toilet paper. I mean, is that pretty amazing or what? Okay, so there's 7 years of plenty, basically, and then that's going to be preceded, or not preceded, but it's going to be followed by what? 7 years of not plenty. Okay, 7 years of holy cow. Okay, and that basically is the cleansing of America, the Gentile nation. As America goes, so will the rest of the world. When America goes down, the rest of the world economy will go down with it. Okay? So the bottom line is that you have about the first 3.5 years. I think the persecution within the church by members of the church is probably going to get really, really bad. Already we've had situations just over masks in the church houses. There's actually been some wards that everybody got together for the first time. Some people were wearing masks, some people weren't. The people wearing masks were saying, you know what, you are being inconsiderate. You are not taking into our, whatever, and you need to leave. You need to get out. And it got so bad, actually, that I've heard of bishops had to basically just shut down the whole thing and say, okay, everybody go home. We're going to have 1 week we'll have masks, and 1 week we'll have no masks. Okay? Anybody heard that going on? Yeah, it's been happening, okay? So bishops have a real weird line to go to. But anyway, so bottom line, I think that just people are going to just get kind of weird for the 3.5 years.
On the 4th year, what do you?
Again, we're not trying to focus on the years. We're just trying to say, okay, these are the time frames kind of thing. But basically, you can do the math. If you just go to 2024 is basically right here. That's the eclipse is basically what I think, and the Pickerings and lots of other people think, that's probably the sign of the beginning of the 7 years of famine. The reason why I think that personally is because that's where the two of them come down together, and that's right where Laconius had his people gathered together to prepare them for what? The 7 year onslaught and siege that's going to be placed against them in the lands of the Book of Mormon. In the center of the lands. Not in the same way as that one is, because they were way over there. We're mostly over here. I can tell you about some of my personal speculations here in just a minute. Let me just kind of get through the timeline part of it here, and then we can just go into some questions and stuff. But basically, so then you got another 3.5 years of basically cleansing of the America. Okay. Now, what do I think is going to happen in this time frame? Basically, I think we're going to see probably a new Madrid earthquake event as a probability. I don't know if that would be at the beginning or towards the end of it. Might be at the end of it. Personally, because of the dreams and visions stuff that I've read and all these books up here, have played into all of this. So I've actually got about 15 different areas of research that I do that play into this whole thing. I'm kind of trying to bounce around in my brain, try to see how this all works together. Basically, what I kind of foresee is that the rioting will continue. I think there will be an effort to try to shut it down by more and more of the patriots of our nation. I think it's going to get more and more polarized to where you have basically, certain cities will be more, pretty much taken over by more conservatives, and some others will be more progressive, basically. I don't know exactly how that works, but the bottom line is I think that eventually things get bad enough that the government can't any longer really effectively shut it down. And so they're going to basically go to the United Nations and ask for help. The United Nations said, yeah, we'll help you out. Russia, we need you to come in and shut down the insurrections going on in the eastern part of the United States. China, we need to come in on the western side and put the insurrections down there. It's only just going to be for a short period of time, just enough to get these cities back under control, and then we're out of here. But when the cities get back under their control, they're going to say, why would we leave? We have bases here now. And that's when basically America is going to go, we've let not only the camel in the tent, but I mean the whole herd is in the tent. Okay? And I think that then we're going to have some serious warfare going on in the United States. I think that's when the prophecy about they will call for the boys from the mountains. I said, bring us men who can talk with God, because we're not going to make it as a nation unless we have some superior intel, which basically is going to come from God. But I think eventually we end up driving them back out of our lands. It may not be the same. We may have different borders than we have now, but basically we do end up driving them out of our lands. I think that's basically going on right about this point in time. Because over in Israel, about the same time as America is being cleansed right here, Israel is beginning its 7 year of cleansing. So basically you have 3.5 years. This is what they call the time of tribulation, basically 1,290 days according to Daniel. There's a half hour of silence in there, silence in there as well. It has the rise of the Antichrist, the little horn, that's talked about as well in Daniel. So Israel is now being attacked and so forth, but they're still hanging in there. But the United States basically, I believe that at this point in time, we kind of overcome to some extent the worst of it. And we're basically kind of still standing on our own, because Israel has to have one ally for this last part here. And who's that ally going to be? The other promised land, called America. The Battle of Armageddon will be between Gog and Magog, right? And the two promised lands. The two promised lands are going to be against the rest of the world. Israel and the United States are going to stand together to fight against every other nation on the earth. And so America is still standing at this point in time. Christ comes the first time at Adam on Diam, it's the first fruits, basically, is talked about in the laws of Moses. So he comes here about this point in time. Just as America is finishing up its cleansing, basically, you have the 144,000. This is the 10 tribes returning. Now, I don't know if we have time to really go into the 10 tribe stuff. Where did the 10 tribes go? I mentioned that some of them went to Russia, some of them went to Europe, and then some of them went somewhere else. But when they return, big things happen, right? What happens when they return? It says the ice is going to flow down at their presence. It said their own mountain will be cast up in the midst of the great deep. A highway will be cast up in the midst of the great deep, right? These are world, earth scale kinds of events happening. They're going to bring their prophets with them. If there's prophets someplace on the earth today, why don't we know about them? Because maybe they're not on this earth. Just saying. And there's a lot more to that than we have probably time to go into today. But basically, so then you have the 4 angels here, you have the 5th angel here, you have the 6th angel here, and the 7th angel here of Revelation. But this is all talking about this cleansing of the Jews. So at this point in time, the United States is basically still kind of hanging in there. Then you have the Great Tribulation, or the wrath, which is 1,260 days. There's a juxtaposition of 30 days. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but my kind of thought is that if you follow the Jewish calendar system, it's a lunar calendar system. And they have the barley crop, and every so many years they have to add a month onto their calendar to bring it into alignment with the solar calendar system. I think maybe there's one of those leap months that end up showing up in there that causes the difference in the 30 days. And you have the two witnesses. These are where the two prophets basically are in Jerusalem. They're causing all kinds of havoc with all the other people out there. They're causing famines and earthquakes and all kinds of stuff. These prophets are really getting them the what for. And then they finally succeed in killing these two prophets, right? In Jerusalem, they lay in the streets for 3.5 days. Then they are resurrected and caught up to heaven. And then the armies of Gog and Magog have now been in a siege against Jerusalem for how long? 7 years. Jerusalem has been under siege now for 7 years, but the worst of the siege has been this last 3.5 years, basically. And so then Christ then ends up coming down. He steps on the Mount of Olives. It splits in half. It opens up the eastern wall, the eastern gate, and all of a sudden the people come out because he basically just wipes out Gog and Magog. Just he says he basically rains down fire from heaven. I don't know, something like that sounds like, because their weapons are burning. Their weapons of war are burning for 7 years after this. And they're burying their dead for 7 months after this. After Christ gets through with Gog and Magog, it's going to be not good to be on the Gog and Magog side of the team. All right, and then basically, so this is the Armageddon. Now this is the abomination of desolation right here, where these two basically meet. This is the end of the American judgment and the end of the first 3.5 years of the Israel cleansing. And so this is basically, abomination of desolation is when it ends. This 2,300 days before that, or prior to that, there will be a altar, and there will begin the daily sacrifice again in Jerusalem. Okay, does I understand it? So what does that mean? It means they're going to actually start doing live sacrifices on a daily basis in Jerusalem. But how are they going to do this? Because Jerusalem is basically, you got the Dome of the Rock, right? And the Muslims aren't going to let them do that. But it turns out that this is the altar that the Jews already have built. This is a crane that has it's on a lowboy trailer, basically. They can pull it off of there with the crane, set it down, and offer sacrifices in about 20 or 30 minutes. So it's all ready to go. They just have to have the okay to do it. This is the Dome of the Rock, and they're not doing it at the Dome of the Rock. Why are they not doing it at the Dome of the Rock here? Whoop, there we go. There's that one. And there's the Dome of the Rock here. They're doing that because that's not where the original things were done. It was done in the city of David. Where's the city of David? This is a sign I took there when I was there a couple of years ago. This is the City of David National Park. This is an archaeological dig that they're doing on the City of David right now. Well, a couple of years ago, they may be wrapping it up by now, but anyway, this is some of the walls of this ancient City of David area right here. And and how do we know that this is maybe the right place and that the Dome of the Rock, maybe the Muslims got it wrong? Because of Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah's tunnel was what brought the water to the temple, and the water doesn't go underneath the Dome of the Rock. It does go under the City of David. And so they built their stuff, they built their mausoleum in the wrong place. And now all I got to do is just have the place where they can pull that truck up, boom, take the big crane, set down the thing, and they can start the daily sacrifice. But they still have to get the permission from the Israeli government. They already applied twice in the last 2 years. Usually they just are dismissed out of hand. Last year, they actually were seriously considered, apparently. That's what I understand. Okay? All right. And to finish this up, it came to pass that he rent his coat, he took a piece thereon, and he wrote upon it in memory of our God, our religion, and our freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children, he fastened upon the end of a pole. And you can actually read that right there on that thing. Okay? It came to pass that when he had poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south of the land of desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and the south, a land of liberty and a chosen land. Moroni said unto them, behold, we are a remnant of the seed of Jacob. We are a remnant of the seed of Joseph, whose coat was rent by his brethren into many pieces. Yea, now behold, let us remember to keep the commandments of God. See, even Catherine Moroni realizes what we got to do to remain free people on this land. Behold, whosoever shall maintain this title upon the land, let them come forth in the strength of the Lord, and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion, that the Lord God may bless them. There is a national covenant, but brothers and sisters, there's also a personal covenant. So you have to ask yourself, have you made the personal covenant to do this? maintain our rights and our religion. Behold, this is a choice land. Whatsoever nation shall be possessed of it shall be free from bondage and from captivity and from all other nations under heaven, if they but serve the God of the land, who is Jesus Christ, who hath been manifested by things which we have written. And the final thing, if my people, which are called by my name, who are those people? Who are the people called by his name? Could be Christians. I think it's us. I think it's members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It basically says, if we will humble ourselves and pray and seek his face and turn from our wicked ways, it says, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. So if God is all you have all you need, right? So so that's basically as far as, if you want to, that's my website and email and so forth, if you want to get that. Just to finish up then real quickly, thank you for your patience. Now, I'm sure you got lots of questions, and I have a lot of things I would like to tell you about. I showed you that stuff about Bosnia and so forth because there was a guy that basically, and he has some really great information to be able to help understand kind of the sequence of events that went. Like at first, when it first started happening, most people didn't believe it. And then finally, it took a certain amount of destruction before people started to realize that this is never coming back. And then, all of a sudden, then chaos ensued. And then he said guns and ammo was the number one thing to have. You could trade with it, you could protect yourself and so forth. He says after a while, though, guns and ammo became less and less important because ammo became more and more rare to find, and a gun's pretty much worthless without ammo. So then it became any kind of commodities you could have, any kind of things. If you had something you could burn, he said, this place gets cold, that we burned everything. He said, you won't believe the kind of stuff that you can burn when you're really desperate and you're freezing to death. There's one guy he had bought 2 containers of Bic lighters, not containers, but 2 like cases of Bic lighters right before this all broke out. He said that guy never had any problems with food or clothing or shelter or anything. He had anything he wanted anytime because he had a Bic lighter that he could sell. Okay, just little things like that. He said we never went out in the middle of the day because there were snipers outside. So everything we did had to be at night, and we had to basically go and trade with other people. And you got to kind of know which apartment complexes were the good ones and which ones were the bad ones. And we made deals with our people within our complex to basically, look out for each other kind of thing, because we're all going to be in this together, right? So he was in these big, tall buildings. And basically, so they had secret passwords and so forth to get in or get out, and they started to learn how to do subsistence farming. And that was really hard because they had to do most of the planting and the harvesting at night when they couldn't really see very well, and you couldn't really use flashlights, so they just had the hope that they had a strong enough moon and so forth. Anyway, it's really interesting to see how all this kind of played out. But they survived. He was one of those people that survived it. And so he has some really good insights on what kind of things you can do. I've got actually, I can tell you how to get to that, okay? So it's called Words from a Bosnian Survivalist. It's online. Words from a Bosnian Survivalist. It says, I'm from Bosnia. I've talked about how the city was blockaded by the army for a 1 year. Life in the city turned into total crap, he says. Gangs started destroying everything. Hunger and cold. He talks about ammunition, candles, lighters, antibiotics, gasoline, batteries, and food. He said we fought for these things like animals. Said men became monsters. It was disgusting. Strength was in numbers. A man living alone got killed and robbed would be just a matter of time, even if he was armed. So the best thing to do is have lots of good friends and neighbors that you can count on, that you can trust, that they trust you, and you know who they are by sight. There's all kinds of just little things like that he just has some really good information. Because we can't really prepare for everything. There's too many scenarios. Yeah, it was actually translated from French into English. This is in English. So, he said there's no more police. removed all the doors, the window frames, abandoned houses. We ripped up floors. We burned the furniture, whatever we could get, whatever we could burn, and so forth. He talks about having weapons and so many rounds of each for the ammo and so forth. I'm just afraid that members of the church are going to think that our safety and security is based on our armaments. Brothers and sisters, if you're counting on your guns to save you, you're thinking about it completely wrong. In fact, I've told people before, I said, I'm all about gun control, okay? Meaning that you better be able to control your gun. You should be able to hit what you're shooting at. But I say that kind of tongue in cheek because the bottom line is I hope to never have to take someone's life. And if people come to me and they're looking for food, and people talk about the call out, a lot of people talk about this call out and so forth. I think that the call out, my personal feeling is probably going to be more of a personal matter than it is a coming down from the church headquarters matter. The reason why I think that is because I think the church legally would have major issues if all of a sudden they said, okay, everybody leave your homes in the safety of your homes and go up in the mountains where you're not prepared and wait till the first winter storm. And how many people are going to die then and so forth. I mean, I don't see that happen. I think our strength actually here in Utah and in Idaho and some places in Arizona would be actually to stay in our homes with our ward members and our stake members and the people that we know and we can trust. And basically, and then when outsiders come in, like I had a business one time with a soup company, basically High Country Gourmet, and we were doing some taste testing and so forth on food storage stuff in Sacramento, California. I remember as clear as day. There's about 5 guys that came in with cowboy hats and stuff on, and we asked them if they wanted to try some food. And they said, no, not really. And I said, well, would you like to have some food for a rainy day? And the guy says, one of the main guys said, not really. And I said, well, do you mind me asking why you wouldn't want to have food for a rainy day? He says, well, because we're only a tank and a half of gas away from Utah. I said, well, okay, so what's in Utah? I said, well, Mormons got food, we got guns. Real simple. I said, well, you think the Mormons don't have guns? He says, well, they have some, but they don't have as many as we do. He says, if just 10% of us, he had a point. He said, if just 10% of us, now this was back when LA had about 12 million people in it, 10% of us can get 1.5 tanks of gas. That's 1.2 million people in Utah at the time when Utah only had about 900,000. This is probably 8 or 10 years ago. He said, we'll just overrun it. And that's only if 10%. What if 20% come? I think it's best for you to follow what Lord wants you to do. So if the Lord's telling you that you need to go somewhere else, then I'd probably do it. I think the mountains is a very bad place to be in a Utah winter.
Yes.
But they would never be that coordinated and that big of groups. I mean, like, I agree.
It'd be hard, yeah.
I recently just bought a gun, but I've always believed myself personally, like,
yeah.
If, you don't need a gun. God, if you pray, he'll guide you, through anything, whether it's to hide out here or,
Yeah.
you don't need a gun.
My thought pattern about that, though, has been God never does really kind of work that way. Basically just say, you know what, I just won't do anything and God will take care of me. Moroni had his armor. Moroni had his sword. He used it. I mean, he killed people and that kind of stuff. He didn't want to. He didn't like taking lives and so forth. But, yeah, exactly. So have some survival stuff and be able to protect yourself and your family. But that's what I'm kind of saying here, and that's what this guy's basically talking about here. Make friends. Have people that you can trust, because you can't stay awake 24/7 either. That was another problem they had. Trying to stay awake and trying to keep everything secure. They were dying just from lack of sleep. And you have to have your sleep, so you've got to have somebody who can guard things while you're trying to get some rest. So he said it just worked out a lot better if you basically made some friends. You shared, you shared your stuff. I mean, you don't have to have 50 different lighters. You just have a couple of lighters, right? For example. Okay. So he had some really just good stuff there. I had a whole bunch of scriptures here. Love to share with you, but there's just not going to be enough time because we really got to wrap this up, right? Okay. I've been way too long. Okay. But I'm just saying, just some of the areas there. We can know if it's coming. I should get this to Colette, and maybe you can kind of get it out to the group, okay? Yeah. These are just basically scriptures, but they, talking about we can know if it's coming. You know, a lot of people point to, well, it says, you know, that we won't know the day or the hour. It doesn't say anything about the week or the month of the year. Okay? In fact, it specifically says that if you're looking for it, you won't be caught like a thief in the night. So if you're looking for the signs, it's not going to be a surprise to you. It will be a surprise to pretty much everyone else because it's going to happen fast when it starts to happen.
Do you have a timeline somewhere that?
Well, it wouldn't look like you had 2034, 35.
Yeah, okay, and that's one of the things. I probably should go back to this one right here. Yeah, and actually he's going to be actually pretty active, as I understand it, during this whole time frame. After this time frame, he's going to be pretty active because basically he's got all the keys. Because at Adam on Yaman, all the keys of the priesthood are going to be basically handed back to him and back to the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days is Adam, and he's going to give it back to who? And say, welcome Christ back to the earth. He's going to be basically here.
What do you think at the end of this?
Well, the first year you're saying is 2024 the loss.
So this would be about seven years after that. That's about 2031 approximately. And then this is going to be, now again, also the other thing is there's a Gregorian calendar system, which we're all talking about, but then there's also the Hebrew calendar system. So this actually may work out to be the end of 2033 or the beginning of 2034. I think the 2034 thing personally, okay, this is total speculation, but it's just my thought process here going on. Why 2034? How long did Christ live?
34.
What was his lifespan? 33, but in the Book of Mormon it says it was 34. Because it went to the next year. It says that in the Book of Mormon specifically, it says that the destruction began on the 34th year, on the first day, on the first month, on the fourth day of the month, there arose a great storm. That's when it happened. It was 34 years and 4 days. Okay? If that's the case, then I think it's just absolutely beautiful that when God set up this whole world, and he did it in these 1,000-year increments, right? So you have the first 1,000 years, the second 1,000 years, the third 1,000 years, and so forth. But in the last one, he throws it kind of all off by adding in 34 years. Why would he do that? And I think the reason is because he's memorializing forever and ever, throughout all of humankind, the life, the precious life of his Son. That 34 years that Christ lived, the only perfect being that ever existed on this earth, will forever be memorialized in our history throughout all eternity by having that 34-year little juxtaposition, basically, or that always ingrained in this earth's history. So when we get on the other side and so forth, there will always be that 34 years. Well, what did that stand for? Well, I'll tell you. There was one of us who stood for all the rest of us and took our beatings for us and took our sins upon him, and we want to memorialize his life forever. So that's just my personal thought.
50-year time capsule, the letter he put in there says in 2033 Christ will be on the earth.
Yeah. Well, he'll be on the earth before then, probably too.
I know he will, but
I mean, as far as his triumphant.
You'll have seen his face.
Yeah.
In that letter.
3 and 4 is 7, which is the number of completeness.
What's that?
3 and 4.
Yeah.
34 is the
34,
number
7, yeah. Yeah, but again, I think it's probably going to be in the spring of the year. Now, there's a whole lot of other signs, though, that we haven't even begun to talk about, but we can do that another time. I'll just tell you what they are in the thing. You can read them for yourself, okay?
Oh, okay.
They're under headlines, so we can know if it's coming. There's a whole bunch of scripture that talk about that. Let me see here.
Can I have these, or is that yours?
Yeah, you can have this one here, yeah. And I'll send you the Word document so you can actually just do that. But then that talks about the sun, the moon, and the stars, and that happening. A hailstorm. By the way, hailstorm is going to be when? It's going to destroy the crops of the earth. When do you have crops on the earth?
In the summer.
In the fall.
In the fall.
Yeah, in the fall.
For harvest, though.
Yep, okay. The hailstones are talked about as being the weight of a talent.
Which is about 70 pounds.
About 75 pounds, yep, exactly. So it's a lot, okay. That doesn't sound like an ice hailstorm. That sounds more like a meteorite shower.
Yeah.
Okay. It seems like it's a lot bigger than that. But a 75-pound rock coming down out of above is going to, I mean, you can imagine the damage. There's no roofs that are going to withstand that. It just pulverized the roofs. The first angel sounded, there was hail and fire mingled with blood. So hail and fire, I think that's an interesting combination between the two, because hail is usually cold, right? But then fire is hot. So I think that tells you that it's not a hail of ice, it's a hail of other stuff. They were cast upon the earth, the third part of the trees were burnt up. The establishment of Zion basically happens, okay? Then you have the 144,000 high priests coming from the 12 tribes, which means that the 10 tribes have to return. Personally, I don't think that they're here on the earth. Personally, I think that there's, okay.
They're probably up in Enoch, city of
I'm not sure if we should record this part. Yeah, we can record, whatever. Okay, it is what it is. Apparently, Orson Pratt made the claim that he heard from Joseph Smith, so this is second and third hand knowledge here, so take it with a grain of salt, that the earth today is approximately 1/4 of its original size. When it talks about the 4 quarters of the earth, it's literally meaning quarters of the earth.
Well,
Okay.
Enoch rose and Salem rose.
So you have the city of Enoch, you have the city of Salem, and the 10 tribes, and the earth as it is today. Pangea, if you ever look at Pangea and you put it all together, okay, it does actually kind of fit. The problem is, if Pangea ever did actually happen, the earth would wobble so violently because if all this mass is on one side of the earth would be going, whoa. Well, that doesn't match up with 2024. There's a 2-year weird window there. Why? And I thought, well, God doesn't do anything by accident. So why is there this 2-year juxtaposition? And I was concentrating and thinking about that and so forth. And basically, I finally realized, oh my gosh, well, maybe it's because we're talking about 2 different covenants. The covenant on America is a national covenant. That's everything from the 9/11 to the stock market crash. That all deals with the United States of America. But when things happen in the stars, when it happens with the planets and the moons and the blood moons and so forth, that is a global covenant. It's a different covenant, so it's on a different time frame, which explains the juxtaposition of those 2 happening. And so I couldn't figure that out, but then once I realized that the global covenant basically supersedes the national covenant, really, when it comes down to that, then you have then once the national covenant is over, which is basically the sign happens at 2022. So I'm still kind of trying to concentrate, what would be a really good sign that God could use that would cause everybody to know that the swept off the land part is about to happen. I don't know what it is. Yeah. Well, but bottom line is something's going to be a big enough sign that we'll all know it. And I think that the Lord has given us 2 years to kind of realize that this is about to happen. And then 2024 is I really think that that's our cutoff date. I think if you're not good to meet your Maker and to be prepared to save yourselves with your food and so forth as much as you can, if you're not prepared spiritually to be able to follow God no matter what He says to do, then you're going to be in trouble. Then I think that's going to be the end of the time frame to be able to prepare. And this goes along with like David Warwick and lots of other people. They've also played a major role in some of this information I've been sharing with you. So you have the 3.5 year periods. Then you have the Christ triumphal return to Jerusalem. Then you have the earth's convulsions. Actually, this period of time right through here is going to be probably some of the most convulsive times ever on the earth. Okay. And that has to do with when these angels trump, when they sound, that's when all these kind of weird things happen, like the wormwood and all that kind of stuff. Sun dark and moon turn to blood, stars fall, scriptures. Then you have no rainbow that particular year, right? You know about that?
Yeah.
Okay. The world will recognize it as a planet or a comet. Okay, I just got to read that one to you. This is from Joseph Smith, Matthew. It says, there will be wars and rumors of wars, signs in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. The sun turned into darkness and the moon to blood, earthquakes in diverse places and seas heaving beyond their bounds. Okay? There will appear one grand sign of the Son of Man in heaven. But what will the world do? They will say, It is a planet, a comet, etc.
It's the Savior.
So what's coming? The world's going to think it's a planet. Aren't they going to be surprised when that planet is inhabited with people, and those people come off and go, oh, by the way, yeah, we came from this planet. Early on, we were the people from the city of Enoch. Yeah, Enoch was our guy. Yeah, this is us. We're here. Thank you for saving a place for us at the table. The city of Salem people, and then the city of the 10 tribes people. Anyway, righteous are not all going to be spared. I've talked to a lot of members of the church as well. As long as I'm righteous, I'm going to be just fine. No. Joseph Smith said, it is a false idea that the saints will escape all the judgments while the wicked suffer. For all flesh is subject to suffer, and the righteous shall hardly escape. See Doctrine and Covenants 63:34. Still many of the saints will escape, for the just shall live by faith. Yet many of the righteous shall fall a prey to disease, to pestilence, etc., by reason of the weakness of the flesh, and yet be saved in the kingdom of God. So just because you die or you succumb to a sickness or you get shot or something else happens to you doesn't mean that you're a bad person and that you weren't worthy. Okay, there was lots of worthy Nephites who died in those battles. Yeah, but I think most of our prophets have lived the word of wisdom and they all have died so far. So my point is that everybody has their time, you know. And you're going to live exactly as long as you're supposed to live. It's one thing I learned when my son died. You know, basically, is that we all have made covenants and so forth in the pre-existence, and we're going to live exactly how long we're going to live. So, why live scared? Yeah. You're going to live exactly as long as you're going to. Live as if God gives you every single day as a gift, and then just do it. You know, and just go out and serve God. Massive earth-scale events happen. If you're prepared, you will not fear. Let's see, great star in heaven, blah, blah, blah. Okay. This is from Doctrine and Covenants 101, verse 35. And all they who suffer persecution for my name and endure in faith, though they are called to lay down their lives for my sake, yet shall they partake of all this glory. Wherefore fear not, even unto death, for in this world your joy is not full, but in me your joy is full. Therefore care not for the body, neither the life of the body, but care for the soul, for the life of the soul, and seek the face of the Lord always. Then in patience ye may possess your souls, and that ye may have eternal life. That's what it's all about. So don't worry so much about saving yourself. It's not about saving yourself. It's about saving other people. And it's not about saving them physically. It's about saving them spiritually. That's what we need to be focused on. That's what we need to be really working on. And I want to thank you for taking what time is it now? 2 o'clock or something?
1:34.
Okay.
1:40.
Okay. Well, it's I think it's better than last time. I don't know. We're doing about 2 or 3. I don't know. Whatever. Okay.
Well, my recording's for almost 4 hours. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, thanks for the opportunity.